All right, and we're recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Actual Play Broadcast. Today, not an actual play, a review of the actual play in a system that we were doing. I am joined by Fisk, Syndra, and Zemian.
What's up?
Uh, and what
Hi.
what
Oh,
will be,
sorry.
you're fine. What we'll be doing is reviewing over Daggerheart.
Playtest.
Yes. The Daggerheart playtest. We played versions 1.2 and 1.3. 1.2, I believe, is what was first released to the public. 1.3 is the recent update that they did, where they changed a lot of things. We're not going to go over the change log. It's for a different channel. Not one of ours.
But it's something to keep in mind if it's a talk about something that maybe did change.
Yeah. The likely what we're going to be talking about doesn't reflect the finished product. That will come out in like a year or so, maybe. I don't know. They didn't really give a timeline for that. But this is, at the end of the day, this is a playtest. This is a beta. This is not final. So what we're reviewing is the playtest, though, and the current iteration of what was made available.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind as we move forward. Another thing, just to be upfront, a number of us are going to rag on this game. If that's all you wanted to hear from this review, I think it's been, I don't know, 60 seconds. You can pack it up, pack it in, let it end, and leave. If you want to hear,
Will admit,
oh, go ahead.
I was thinking, will admit that we are not normally major fans of rules light type systems, though we did keep that in mind while we were playing. That okay, it's not our type of game, but as objectively as we can look at it.
Yeah, and like for a number of these things, even while I was writing out my thoughts that way I wouldn't forget them. A number of the times the thoughts went from like, oh, I find like objective, like not necessarily objective, but like that goes from my opinion to me ragging on the game. I'll try to limit that overall. That way you can hear what we think is wrong with the game. But I make zero promises.
It's probably gonna happen. We're gonna talk about the game and what we like and dislike. And that might come with some longer or shorter tirades about things.
Yeah. So if you're here to hear a positive review about Darrington Press's Daggerheart preview playtest, you're probably not going to get it here. We'll mention the things that we like because there are things in this game that we do like.
Yeah,
it's not going to be a total bash fest. It's just overall
Negative.
the short version is not a great opinion
Yeah.
of it.
I mean, if you're looking for a review and specifically after like a result, then I don't know if you're really using reviews correctly, but
Yeah.
that's beside the point.
But anyhow, let's get this going. So I did have like organized thought of how I want to do this. I'm just going to go down the list of what I got. Core concept of the game. What is this game? From what we could tell, because they're a little, they call it a narrative forward or story focused or combination of synonyms of those game. They didn't call it rules light. They didn't call it mid-core. We're going to refer to it as one of those two things. They didn't call it a crunch fest. They didn't say it was a 5e replacement. They said it is a narrative-focused RPG game. They have a number of aspects that they pull into it for like, that's kind of board gamey, like the cards.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those cards are actually useful, but we'll go over that later. Do you guys think I missed anything on that?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
Then let's jump straight into how it feels to play the game. I won't speak too much on this because I didn't really play I
I think that's still relevant. You're still
yeah.
participating in play.
No, I mean I will, but I want to hear your opinions first.
Okay, well, who wants to start? Because I do have some opinions how it feels to play the game. It's gonna be
go ahead.
angled from a specific class, or, well, yeah, archetype basically.
Yeah, I think all of us will be, really.
Yeah. So I am gonna start with the positives. The abilities for the wizard, which is in the system a mix of the Codex and Splendor domains, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Functioned on a mechanical level pretty interestingly, if a little limited, but that's like a rules light system
Yeah.
problem overall, for me at least. But the abilities that I got access to as a wizard, they were interesting, and even at only low levels, they were extremely useful. They allowed you to do a lot of supportive things that were very narratively powerful, like, I don't know, lighting up a room, identifying magic, etc. You know, the sort of stuff you would expect a wizard to do. It helped with the class fantasy. And the spell books that you get access to in their ability cards were certainly they did put some attention into making each one of the tomes that you get access to have a varied set of abilities in them. Well, that's to say, there are two in each one of them, and they are oftentimes rather dramatically different in their effects.
Yeah,
Which I think is a
I
good
admit
thing.
it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I actually think the kind of way the class system is kind of cool. Where like there's this set of domains. I think they were called domains.
Yes.
Yeah.
And each class is a pair of them.
Yeah, that system I feel is is actually pretty cool. The two domains and how you mix the match them to create your own little variant of the class. Because, for example, Splendor domain is usually for like cleric or paladin or other such uh, in more traditional concepts, I guess, if people understand that. They deal with a lot of like healing and holy magic, etc. And you can mix and match that with the more arcane magics of the Codex skill tree or domain.
I agree. I like the concept of the domain system. My biggest complaint about it is that in its current iteration, there are too few options when you're like leveling up or selecting your cards and stuff. At character creation, you probably have the most options you have
Mhm.
to choose from in a sort of sense. On the assumption that every time you level up, you want to pick your highest level available cards as your pool. And my issue with that comes from the fact in our playtest, I was playing a druid, and one of our players who wasn't here, Ali, was playing a ranger. We shared a domain, and we actually had to like communicate a little bit to. We ultimately decided, pick what you want. But there was that conversation had to happen of like, well, what abilities are you taking? Because I, at least at the start, I had more of like the nature stuff, and he also was taking some of that stuff as a ranger naturally.
Yeah.
And if you're if you're sitting at a table and you have a group of 6 to 7 friends, like most groups, I would assume is probably around 5 or 6 people playing as player characters, you're gonna have overlaps in certain regards, and your group might be the group who does not like to have any kind of overlap. You might want everybody to be unique enough in their own right that they don't have to worry about somebody else stealing the thunder from them because they also have an ability that does the same exact thing. Or maybe your group doesn't care. But me personally, it's an extra layer of like, my character's not as unique because another character can just do what I do. But on the other side of things, that also means you have less of a dependency on having certain classes. I think the only like exception from this, from what I've seen, is in regard to healing. I think there's only one class that has like a good setup for healing. I know Druid can get a little bit of it, but I think almost all of the healing is in one domain.
Primarily Splendor,
So,
yeah.
and there's only like one class that really is like focused on it, from what I can tell.
The wizard could actually, if you wanted to, you could turn the wizard into basically a
Okay.
healer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it as far as character concepts go, the domain system kind of has it be fairly open, just because of the way the rest of the stats work and all of that. But when it comes to a healer, you're probably the most limited. If you want to be a fighter, then it's like, well, what type of fighter do you want to be? And you have a lot of options in that regard. Whether it's I want to be a paladin or I want to be a monk or, insert whatever here. Monk is probably one of the concepts that's probably the least represented in this system, funnily enough,
Yeah.
considering the company that made it.
Yeah.
And a certain iconic character that is a monk tied to that company. But if I was a developer on this system, I would be putting more pressure to produce more options at every level. And
It feels a little like you're
especially,
kind of like stepping on people's toes a little.
yeah, plus it's also like from a replayability factor. Because let's be honest, no matter what game it is, certain abilities just are going to be better than other abilities. And so while you might even have a decent number of options, some of those options may just flat out not be as good as other options. And you might find yourself taking the same thing over and over and over again.
No, but why are you optimizing in this game?
It's not about
Yeah,
optimization. Like, it can be, but it's not necessarily.
Yeah, that's a subject I'll definitely get into because it has a lot to do with some stuff that I've read up along the way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even just concept-wise, I don't know if I see myself playing the same class more than once, unless I do want to like play a very similar play style, in character and everything. Where in a lot of games, like you can replay the same class and have still a lot of differences. That said, it is a playtest, like we said before, so like they might just add more
Yeah.
more cards to get.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I might say something super radical here.
Radical.
If I was working on this system, and maybe it's just because of where my design philosophy is at these days, but if I was working on this, I would be a strong proponent of saying, guys, why do we have the classes?
Yeah.
Rather
The
than
domain
just, like,
system is very cool, and it's very easy to say, get rid of class. When you make a character, you pick 2 domains. Maybe at a higher level, you get to pick a third, or something like that. And just let people mix and match.
the
And
classes
just
do
do
have some of
some
their own
wild shit. I think that would be cool.
The classes do have some of their own special abilities. They kind of determine how they interact with the domains, but I do think like the fact that every class is a pair of domains like really says that like it makes me want to be able to mix and match them.
Yeah.
Well, it's like some of those class abilities I think could easily be turned into either like you could take what are class abilities and turn them into like their own category of like higher end ability cards, or
Yeah, or like minor cards or something that you start with.
yeah, like break them down into components. Like Druid has the base beast shape built into the class, and for the most part, you could probably get away with just having that entire ability on a card, because most of the abilities are designed to scale, and so's beast shape.
Which is nice.
Yeah, you only unlock certain transformations, and the transformations are not busted. They're actually, in my opinion, kind of lackluster. Unless you can actually like really find the situations where you can really abuse some advantage benefit. But aside from that, the shapeshifts are kind of the forms themselves are not like super strong or anything, so you could probably, at least for Druid, there was nothing on Druid as a class that didn't feel like it was too strong to just not be on the card. So that's kind of my hot take, is get rid of classes. Let us pick domains.
I think something that could be pretty cool though is like leave the classes because they have their own identity, especially subclasses and stuff, but like add an extra class where you do just get to pick your domains.
Yeah.
And maybe have like some just generally applicable class features. I couldn't say what they could be just because we literally just thought of that, but
yeah, like my thought, like if you really wanted, it's just like, no, we want the classes. Okay. Well then for each of the classes, generalize them like by title more, like wizard, or you could keep as wizard. Have their primary domain be codex, and then okay, go grab a secondary domain. Go pick it.
oh yeah, I could see that too. Yeah, or like each class has a domain that you have to have with it, but you pick the other one.
Yeah, and you can go grab the other one because that
That would
allows
have
you.
kind of a
Go ahead. Sorry,
oh, sorry. It would have kind of a secondary layer of like subclass selection.
that's my thought.
Yeah.
Because then you could attach the abilities to that primary class and that primary domain, and then it's like, cool, now you can flex into another domain. You want to be a fucking green wizard? Cool, get Codex and get Sage. Do you want to
Yeah.
be a spellblade? Take the fighter one, the blade, and take Codex or arcane. Like you get a lot more flex out of that because there's like 36 combinations or more that they could do, and there's like
definitely more than how many classes there are.
oh yeah, way more.
I do think they mentioned that these classes that exist are like they mentioned that there are like that many combinations and they don't have classes for everyone yet.
Yeah, I assume they're planning on making more in the future.
Well,
I think like sorry.
Go ahead.
I think if I were the one, I guess it's similar to what Zach said, like where if I were to design this class system myself, I think I would make a number of classes equal to just the number of domains there are, and have each class have a domain that is tied to them, that is the required one, and then you can pick your second one from there. I don't know. I don't remember how many classes there are off the top of my head.
That's
or how many domains there are for that matter.
And that's barring the creation of more domains.
Yeah, I like much like more classes. Like I assume they might make more domains in the future. I mean, there's design space for it, so why not?
Like I know what I would call one that's like warlock based, pact. Just call it pact.
Yeah,
you got gold there.
Yeah, that is actually that brings me to something that I wanted to talk about with the sorcerer. So this is kind of funny. So sorcerer is Arcana and Midnight domain, and Arcana is the so where wizard has the Codex domain, which is the intellectual magic. Arcana is the natural, more instinctual magic. Yeah, it's like wizard and sorcerer in D&D, so it's what you expect. Midnight is a kind of stealth, roguish sort of magic domain. It's magical. It's like shadow magic, and it's got some illusory stuff. Like one of the starting ones you can get is Rain of Blades, where like it's a damage spell. It's an AOE one. But the way it's flavored is like you choose your number of targets, make your spellcast roll, and you throw like ethereal conjured throwing blades at them, which is like definitely like in the flavor of that like sort of sneaky mage kind of thing, which for me actually worked great. It's like what I wanted to do. Oh, and another one I'm looking at my character sheet is Uncanny Disguise. I think this is a level 2. No, it's a level 1. It's Disguise Self.
Yeah.
So still in the, I think actually the it looks like the image on the Midnight cards is like Rain of Blades happening. At least it's what I imagined it looking like, pretty much.
Yeah.
So like I really like that like stealthy shadow illusion magic kind of theme a whole lot. So for me personally, it worked out really well. But maybe not everyone who wants to play a sorcerer necessarily wants to do that. And like I don't think the concept for a sorcerer as explained in this game, which it's again, it's kind of the same as like D&D or Pathfinder. It's the intuitive magic based on an origin. That really requires you to specifically have the Midnight domain. It necessitates the Arcana domain. Like that's the one that, like it's very definitely in this hypothetical system, sorcerer would have Arcana and you would pick another one, and then like for a concept like I played, I would pick the Midnight domain, but there would be room for other kinds of concepts. Where
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I kind of came to that take of like, let's just get rid of the class system and just pick domains, because of some domain combinations are no brainers for some of the classes, but then you do have instances of like sorcerer where it's like, but why though? But you can look at other
Yeah.
classes and like traditionally their combination makes sense, but then if you think about like, well, what if I wanted to emulate this type of play style from another game or whatever, or this type of character archetype from some other source material? Those domains may not line up.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of a restriction that may not necessarily feel good. And yeah, it might feel a little narrow in scope of what you can or can't do. Because if you are playing a sorcerer and you don't really care about doing the sneaky illusion type stuff, then you're relegated to playing out of one domain, effectively.
Yeah.
And if somebody else in your party also has a domain and they're picking things from that domain, you're much more likely to have overlap with that player. And that might reduce the enjoyment of your experience.
Yeah. I think actually, to continue with sorcerer as an example, it's the one I can speak for. Honestly, I think that, in my opinion, at least, the single required domain and then other domain chosen would work very, very well for having several different sorcerer concepts in the same way that other games do. Where so the sorcerer subclasses available right now are primal and elemental origins, and they have more to do with how you interact with magic than necessarily the kind of magic you have access to or that you like specialize in. The elemental one kind of leans toward like you do specialize in an element, but um, neither of them determines like what spells you have access to or anything like that. And I think being able to choose one of your two domains would kind of let you conceptualize where your magic comes from.
Yeah. And oh, sorry. Didn't know you had more.
Oh no, that was it.
One of the things that like I take issue with is there's a lot of I run into the system with games that try to be rules light, is, and it's been touched on a bit, the lack of identity. One of the things that I feel that with, and I feel this from a GM perspective as well, because that's how I saw it and ran into it. If you listen to our 3 episodes, by the way, our 3 episodes was a custom adventure made by me. It wasn't their playtest materials. Their playtest campaign that they had. Because I wanted to see how the game scaled. The original goal was for us to go from 1 to 6. We got to 3. The system was not jiving. One of the issues I ran into is when I call for someone to make a check, I'm calling for an attribute. I'm not calling for a skill. So one of the things is, and I think we touched upon it when we were closing out session 3, is if you have a happy-go-lucky character who doesn't like to lie and doesn't like lying to people, has never lied a day in their life, but they have the presence at +3, they are going to be good at lying. It doesn't matter. If you have someone who is super strong and the strong man of the circus, he's also a great swimmer.
Yeah.
That doesn't, not saying that doesn't make sense and that can't happen, like that because you make a character concept they're not great at this thing, but part of, at least for a number of our experiences, part of our characters, not necessarily personality, but identity comes from the skills they have. And when you don't have skills and it's just like, well, you just have this attribute, you're very persuasive, you have this presence about you, that some of that feels lost. And we run into that again with class identity. Is what's if you had 2 sorcerers in your party, you have 2 sorcerers in your party. The way that you tell the difference is going to be very lackluster because of the limited options, which, yes, they can expand, but you're still, both of you are still drawing from the same pool. Because, if it's not unusual for
pretty narrow pool.
Yeah, it's a narrow pool. So I feel like the game doesn't give a lot in the way of character identity. Mind you, you do fill in a lot of information about your character, like their backstory and their bonds and how they connect with other people in the party. And that's fine, but there's no mechanical representation of that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, kind of because it's tangentially related to what we talked about at the end of the last episode for our playtest, which if you didn't watch it, we essentially brought up the idea saying using homebrew as a defense for allowing things of a system is not a great defense. It's irrelevant. You can homebrew any system. I bring it up because tangentially, I can fluff my character and story and such for that character in any system. So while you can say the system allows for a lot of freedom of expressing your character how you want, some of that is supported by mechanics, but a large meat of that is just the nature of it being a tabletop RPG.
Yeah.
That can be a whole debate in and of itself, but it's there's some stuff here for it. It would be cool to have more in relation to that skills. It does to me not feel great to not have actual skills and to only have a handful of attributes and then be as general and sweeping as they are.
Yeah, because not only if you have more than one sorcerer, but if you have more than one character who is a class with instinct as their primary ability, all of the things you do that aren't cards are going to be the same. Like you'll specialize in all of the same stuff.
Fisk, you were saying something.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
they let you finish that, but yeah, it was basically going to agree and say like how it feels to play when you make your character and whatnot. I noticed that, and also when in play, there isn't a lot of things that interact with uh, your skills as they are on the sheet. Uh, I had a thing from being a Qatari, the Qatari, whatever what it was called, right?
Yeah, the
Cat
cat
people.
cat folk.
Yeah, the Qatari.
Yeah, the Qatari had a thing for like when they were moving sneakily and one for perception, if I remember correctly. Let's see. What was the website called again?
Demiplane.
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 Daggerheart, yes. I forgot to bring that up. I should probably do that so I can actually check it for references. And I apologize if I'm doing a little sniffly. But I have a cold.
You're fine.
Just don't be sick, Fivehead.
Yeah.
Yes.
While you look that up,
But
you got it. Never mind.
yeah, for example, I got from Qatari. I got oh no, Qatari is just any agility roll. The Wildborn was where I got advantage on moving silently. I have like one thing that is specifically for a skill on the entire character.
And
Yep.
even then, that's kind of vague. I do like how experiences allows you to kind of make some separation, but it doesn't make up for having a whole list of skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be nice if you could like at least put out some little more focuses on skills and on and such, because that allows you to express who your character is a little bit better, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the usual. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
Well, that was done.
Like the usual assumption when making a narrative first rules light system is that like you're leaving more space for players to express their character's personality and capabilities and such more freely. But I think, at least in my experience and in my opinion, the result most of the time is that there are just fewer options. And like, yeah, you have room to just fluff things how you want and say they are what they are, but it isn't as satisfying when it's just not mechanically represented.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you can always like flavor is free, as
Yeah.
someone I know say. You can always role play and flavor your abilities and represent them in narrative however you want. But mechanically, it helps to have some backbone for how you go about presenting your character.
Yeah.
Because like because always we are here to play role-playing games, and that's how we try to express our characters, etc., etc., etc. And we build up backstories and their motivations and their wants and desires and flaws, etc. But it would help, especially for newer players, I feel, to have something where you can put out, yeah, my character is actually good at specifically, I don't know, analyzing things or perceiving things.
Or picking locks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like without skills, and then with as quite frankly, crunched down the numbers are, um, it feels like you're supposed to be like yeah, let me put my biggest pluses in the things that are going to be relevant to my character. But a lot of the time, the difference to a +3 to a -1, at least to me, feels largely irrelevant. Like, I still fished for getting as big of bonuses as I could, but unless I was effectively doubling whatever my usual bonus would be, I didn't really feel like it mattered much. Now, I don't know on the GM side what the DCs for things looked like, but I felt like I was either rolling super low or rolling super high. I know I had some instances where I had like some 10s and 11s and stuff here and there where I did have that middle of the road results, but I felt like I either blew the DC out of the water or was way below it.
Can confirm.
And so the bonuses largely don't feel relevant, which means in the grand scheme of things, having a +3 in instinct doesn't really matter. Like, realistically, the variation there, I'm technically more likely to succeed at perceiving something or sensing or navigating compared to everybody else. But also, that bonus isn't enough to make me consistent at it. And that's where I have the problem. There's not consistency with those bonuses. And I'm not saying I need to be succeeding 90% of the time, but at the end of the day, it feels like a 50-50 on whether or not I succeed. And maybe for your play group, your players don't mind that. I have encountered people who are all for, oh yeah, 50-50, whatever, I don't care if I fail or whatever. But there are players like myself that I want my character to have the things they're good at. And it's not about being good at everything. It's, if my character is supposed to be good at this thing, they should be consistent at it. Because if you think about it, if you're hiring an accountant to handle your taxes, you don't want to hire the person who's going to have a 50-50 shot on filing your taxes correctly. You're going to go with somebody who's going to do it correct most of the time, maybe with an occasional error because people are human.
Yeah,
And so if I'm going to be the guy who's like in front of the group making sure we're navigating, I should meaningfully, mechanically be better at it than other people. And sure, there are ability cards that might influence certain things here or there, but if your character is solely defined in their abilities based off of their domain cards, then you have an even greater problem of, well, what happens when you have one or two other players in the party that are now having the same abilities because you decided to not care about overlap.
Yeah. Oh, what was I gonna say? Oh, right. The bonus scaling is actually something that I had an issue with as well. It's kind of fine for like for an opposed roll if you and the opposition are relatively close in bonus and such, or so the bonus will matter a lot there. But when you're trying to hit a DC, I think the DCs are set at a point where the bonus matters very little, at least at the point we were in the game. I don't know exactly how big they can get, but even then, I don't think. I think they only start to matter at like max level. For example, one of the sorcerer class features is minor illusion. So you make a spellcast roll at DC 10. On success, you do a minor illusion. So my bonus to a spellcast roll at level to be, I think my sheet is still level 2. That's right, yeah, because I missed the 3rd session. But so at level 2, my spellcast bonus is +3 because it's just my instinct bonus. So my chances of failing to even manifest that ability at all are fairly low. Like I have a +3 on a DC 10 roll, so it's. I think it can kind of lead to if it were something like, okay, I'm trying to hit someone with a thing, and they have a chance to dodge it, and like I have a chance to hit them, and like our stats are working against each other, it kind of makes more sense. There's another factor in, from someone trying to avoid being hit by that thing. But I can't even make my abilities happen all the time. Or at least most of the time, I feel like,
Yeah.
in some cases.
And like the way it maths out, because I understand this is a narrative focused game, but math is important. Math is important. It's important to think about.
Yeah, highlight the game part. You are supposed to play this, not just
Tell a story.
narrate fiction the entire thing.
There's-
There's a game element here.
So one of the things that like you do is you roll 2 sets of dice. You roll 2 dice and you add bonuses. You roll 2d12. One is your fear, one is your hope. You want the hope to be higher, but at the end of the day, you add them both together, and then you add your bonus. So without critting, the highest you can get is a 23 before modifiers on just a dice roll. That's where you roll a 12 and 11. You slam that out of the park. The game defines 30 as impossible. As an impossible thing to do. Whether or not that's actually impossible, I didn't work out the math on that. But
They're saying like it's mechanically impossible to achieve that, or that
that's its difficulty level.
a DC 30 would be an impossible task.
A DC 30 would be an impossible task.
I
Okay.
think it's like, a task that's so hard, most people just assume you can't do it, but like it's probably technically possible once you level
Yeah.
up a little bit, but as a PC.
It's a weird thing to name a DC category, but fair enough.
I mean, I've seen it in a few
It's
other
heroic
ones.
fantasy.
Yeah.
I think calling it something like legendary or whatever like would make more sense, because
I think Legendary's the tier before.
if you're describing the DC as it's impossible, maybe it should actually be impossible.
Or
Like,
calling it like overwhelming or something.
you
Yeah.
know, it's that thing of like, why are you giving Kane a character sheet? Like, well, I guess some people may not understand that. What, like, if gods aren't supposed to be killed in your setting, why are you giving god stats?
Yeah, you're taking a
Like-
big risk if you do that.
Yeah, like don't assign a DC to something if it is actually meant to be impossible. Like, just call it something else.
And to answer your question about like the relevant DCs for the opponents, the lowest was 7 on the zombies. They were a horde, so whenever you did damage to them, usually, as long as you didn't roll dog shit for damage, you hurt a lot of them all at once. The highest was 16, which was with a fight with the boss at the end, and which was technically beyond your guys' level. To be fair, that bitch would do 2d20 damage to you if she hit, which would fuck your world up. If I didn't roll like dog shit. But neither here nor there. Other than that, for your guys' level, I used the jacked knife group. So it was like jackknife, knee breaker, lieutenant, sniper. Their DCs were like 12 to 13. So if you want to, when looking at that for like how the difficulties went, Zach, you are correct. Either you blew it out of the water or it didn't matter. Like the bonuses don't feel like the bonuses feel negligible. And one of the things, like jumping back to experience, and this is an issue that I kind of have with, I think the game's philosophy. I think the game's philosophy is confused. It pushes itself forward as a narrative-focused game. And a lot of the people in the community, I don't want to say a lot of the people in the community, that'd be a misrepresentation. Loud voices in the community have
That's how it is
said,
most games.
yeah, that is most games, to be fair, yeah, have said that the game should not be optimized. You should not play to be optimized. You should not worry about optimizing combat, worry about optimizing XYZ, da-da-da-da-da. Here's my retort. I have played very few RPGs that give me 6 resources to track. At the best of times, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 that you have to worry about for D&D, which is a mid-core game, a mid-level game. You have your HP, you have your spell slots, and then you have your class ability. You have some other zany shit here and there that you might be to use every once in a while. This game has 6. It has HP, which is your resource to not die, stress, which is a resource to do your abilities and to not die, fear, a resource the GM uses against you, actions, a resource that you use and the GM uses against you, and hope, your big resource that you have to use for a large majority of your actions, including using experience.
Also armor slots.
And armor slots.
Which I will say, I actually like the resources in this game, but
I do too.
I do think Brandon is right about, or rather, I agree with Brandon about the philosophy and the result of those resources.
I do want to add, to further enhance your point about the philosophy being confused.
I was gonna have you
It
actually do
isn't
your quote.
it wasn't just voices in the community. I'm not going to name particular individuals, but there was a stream from people who are making design decisions in the game. And
Oh, that's
in
fine.
regards to combat, they did outright say, if you are trying to optimize combat, you're not approaching the game as intended
That's
effectively. I can't remember the exact words they said, so don't take this as an exact quote, but the essence of what they said was to not ask yourself when you were making a combat decision, what is the best thing in this situation, but what do I want out of the story? And I can, to a degree, respect that opinion. I'm not going to say, oh, these people don't understand game design or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to say that. However, personally, from my perspective, if my character is in combat, my character is going to do what they think is going to impact the situation in the best way possible. Now, from an in-character perspective, they may think, this is FUBAR, I'm leaving. And that may not actually be, in the grand scheme of things, a mechanical optimized choice. But if your characters are running into combat and you're running into combat, just throwing all caution to the wind, not caring, you're probably going to get your teeth punched in a few times. Now, granted,
I would like to add to that too once you finish with this point.
Yeah, the death is not a consequence in this system. Like, if you want death to be a consequence in your game, that's not this system, because players can just choose to not die. So, if their philosophy really is just do whatever the hell you want, optimizing is not the way we want you to approach the game. Fair, I guess, because death has no consequence. Death isn't a consequence for player characters. So
it's not forced.
Yeah, like, it's something you can choose to do, but realistically, how many players are actually going to choose to die if given the choice?
Not a whole lot. I've done it before in a different game, but like, very
Yeah. So
specific context.
the main point being, it's not just players saying this. There are designers and developers who are backing that ideology of don't optimize, and that, especially with the pressure of doing things from a fiction perspective, I have some serious questions if your characters in the fiction aren't doing everything they can to survive. Like, why aren't they doing that? Which can be a valid roleplay thing.
Yeah.
Like, you could roleplay a character who is like suicidal in how they fight, realistically, but like, that's not going to be the majority of people.
And
So
if someone tells you that you're playing the game wrong for, trying to optimize, even accidentally, because you want to create a character that is good at something, that is a pretty, I would say, a pretty risky opinion to have. you need to take into account that that this will happen organically, even because people want
Yeah.
to play. Many people want to play a character that is good at something, and there are many players out there that take joy in optimizing their character. So it's gonna happen, and that's a fair criticism to have that comes up. That like sure you need to cater to you want to cater to the those who focus on the narrative, but you can't just ignore the people who try to actually engage with the system mechanically either, because there's many ways for us to approach role-playing games.
Yeah, I have a few points on this actually. I didn't see that developer video. I'm glad they made that video. That sounds cool. But
It was a stream, but yeah.
okay, yeah, I definitely just missed it then. I do think there's something a little bit, and so I don't know how this was articulated in the stream, but in a game where it's narrative first and the idea, at least from what I understand, the intent of a narrative first game is to give a lot of choice to the people playing it. Um, saying that you have to approach the game a certain way for it to function is kind of antithetical to that. Like, you have to play it in a very narrow style for it to work. But also, I did want to reinforce what others said about just if I'm playing a character who is good at what they do, which they are if they're an adventurer of some sort, probably, and aren't dead or disabled by now, they I think it's reasonable to assume that that person who lives that life is actually better at doing those things and making those decisions than I am in real life. So, whatever decisions I make in that situation, even if I'm doing my absolute best to make them correct, probably still aren't as good as that actual person's decisions would be if they were real, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think so. I'm going to use the word optimization and optimal in a few of my points throughout this review, and I want to clarify. I'm not necessarily talking about min-maxing or anything of the sort. I think that's the usual connotation that optimization has in the context of role-playing games.
I think more accurately
But
power gaming, right? Where
yeah,
people
like
are trying to abuse every possible advantage in what would be the right way of putting it? In an unfun way for the table.
Guidance.
yeah, in a way, generally, I think when power gaming happens and it's talked about in a negative light, it's that somebody is trying to make their character as powerful as possible in ways that are not considerate to the fun and enjoyment of the other people around them. And I think when you're playing any collaborative game, or any competitive game for that matter, you should be considerate of the fun of the people you're playing with. It's a game. But anyway, I think like if I'm in a combat and I'm just like, oh man, I am emotionally invested in this story in a campaign that I'm playing. I want to succeed. My character wants to succeed. I want to try my best. It makes sense that I'm going to try to make effective decisions. And I think um, the suggestion to think less about what would be most successful and more about what you want to get out of the story actually reminded me of something um, that I've experienced in other kinds of roleplay. In freeform roleplay, I've seen it a little bit in LARP, depending on what's going on. But I'll use an example of so in something that doesn't normally have PvP, maybe either a freeform roleplay or the LARP, like I said, at least the LARP I play in doesn't have PvP as like a primary thing. When that does come up, so everyone is conscious of everyone else's enjoyment and such. Generally, what will happen is exactly that, where there might actually be an out of character discussion beforehand of like, actually, I think this has happened in like a World of Darkness server I've been in a bit too, where the players will discuss, all right, how do we actually want this to resolve in the end? if our characters are fighting each other, for example. Like, to stick with the PvP example, most of the time, we're probably not going to want to just dice roll and see how it goes. But maybe we will, but maybe not. There might actually be a discussion of, okay, how do we want the story to go? What do we think is the best way for it to go narratively, etc. And then once we decide on that, we'll role play it out in a way that's dramatic and fun and cool. And I don't think that really it works well as an option when it comes up and it's what everyone has decided to do. And like I think that should be available at most tables, really. It isn't really something you can put in a game. Like you can't really make mechanics for that because it defeats the purpose. But when that basically that internally, I suppose, is the encouraged way to interact with a system, then the system even having dice rolls, like, or the chance at success and failure that you didn't expect because of said rolls, doesn't mesh with that philosophy. Like that philosophy and the chance of success or chance of failure don't go together. Because if I'm like, all right, what I want out of the story right now is my character to be triumphant in this situation and overcome a major fear that they had or something. And then what ends up happening is that I fail the roll. I mean, in this game, I literally roll fear and they just don't succeed. Then that character development probably didn't happen after that. If that makes sense. I hope I'm not just like
Oh,
saying
like
gibberish. I know I've gone on for a while, but
it's there. This game has like it took some of the design philosophies from like your standard like Pathfinder D&D, pulled them in, and then when look, powered by the apocalypse, let's grab that, and like it has this foundation that is this narrative focused rules light, and has like the walls and accoutrement of a actual like well defined like mechanical system, like mechanical depth. And
yeah.
it tries to do both, and I think it fails at both because it tried to do both. And Zach has a
Yeah.
great fucking quote for this.
Yeah, from a private discussion we had, sharing it. And wanted to share this quote, and he's not prepared.
I was
waiting for him to
having you say it.
Oh, you're gonna have me say it.
It's your quote.
Yeah, they haven't said it apparently.
I'm assuming it's about the different audiences.
Yeah.
It's that specific bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, my initial impressions, between playing it a little bit and just looking more at the system, I came away and I said there's sort of a writing on the wall here. There's the casual audience might be too casual for Daggerheart. The mid-core audience, those who don't want too much crunch, but they don't necessarily want rules light. So most people who enjoy like 5e generally, the mid-core audience are struggling with how light it is, and crunch lovers are just going to hate it.
Yeah.
There's because, and Brandon, you're not the only person who said this. I have seen it in some parts of the community of people who do like the game, but people have acknowledged the system very much feels like an amalgamation of several systems. And I think it's a very appropriate thing to say that it does feel like a predominantly, there might be other bits in there, but predominantly it feels like a hybridization of Powered by the Apocalypse and Dungeons and Dragons. You you can very easily sit down and see the DNA of those things in this game if you know what you're looking for, and some of it is also like really obvious. But it's trying to pull the strengths of both, and personally, I don't feel like it's getting there. I know they have not said that it is meant to replace D&D, but when you are evoking this sense of experience, these type of abilities, and quite frankly, these class fantasies and identities and all of this, whether that is your intention to have it be an alternative to D&D or not, people are going to perceive it as that because it is existing in the same niche. And so while it might be about telling different stories, it is going to appear as an alternative. And generally, audiences have a feeling of what they like. Sometimes people might be versatile in the types of systems they want to play. But as far as like for the casual audience, the system still has a notable amount of meat on its bones. There are people out there who want to like the system.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, Brandon, there's all these different trackers to keep track of. You've got your armor, you've got your HP, you've got your stress, you've got your hope, and all of this other stuff. And for some people, that's too much. There are people out there where that's too complicated. There are people who feel like having the cards is too much. There are people who are genuinely looking at the system and saying, "I wish it was lighter." There are people who are in that mid-core audience who kind of swing either way. They wish there was a little bit more meat on the bones, especially in regard to combat. That's one of the things, like, the people who are like, we need things to be more defined, a lot of people are bouncing on the combat. One of the streams I attended, there were a lot of questions surrounding combat and very little in the way of answers. And at the current time of recording, the only answers has been like one or two optional rules, and that's it. And so there's a lot of people kind of hitting those issues, trying to look for specific answers to things, and they've also expressed a lack of interest in getting those answers because their philosophy on the game is they want to grow this idea of rulings over rules where it is up to your table to interpret. And in my personal philosophy for game design, outside of certain controlled circumstances, that's a terrible idea, especially as a system-wide blanket, in my opinion. If that's the path they want to go down, by all means, me personally, I don't agree with it. And crunch people, I mean, this system's going to be agonizing. There's nowhere near enough fiddly bits for crunch people. They're not touching this with a 10-foot pole unless they're one of those people who are like, yeah, I'll play anything. I don't care.
Yeah. Fisk, you had a point. I want to jump into the next thing, which is going to primarily be me rambling, I think, so I apologize ahead of time, but Fisk, you have something you want to bring up?
Yeah, when we're talking about combats, it feels very swingy.
It is.
Oh yeah.
It's like it doesn't feel like you have much control over the situation as a player,
Yeah,
which is a weird feeling. It's like, sure, chaos combats can be chaotic and they can go out of control, but that it feels that way all the time.
even when you like make a plan and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Which doesn't really mesh very well with thinking about what you want out of the narrative for the situation.
yeah.
Like, you can think about that all you want. The chances of it actually going the way you want it to go narratively are like pretty low. unless you've had a discussion with the GM about that and both agree on how you want it to end. In which
Yeah.
case, you don't have to roll dice.
Which segues very nicely into like my next point, because like one of the first things I bring up is this popcorn initiative, which I think is like the just accepted term. How it felt to run the game. I did not enjoy running this game. If not for the same reasons I don't enjoy running Powered by the Apocalypse, because I've ran that twice and each time just wasn't a fan, just didn't jive with me. But running it for a group of people that I know, running it for this group is fine, because everyone here is respectful of each other's times, opinion, and everyone's like, we want everyone here to have fun. I cannot imagine doing this as a pop-up game at a shop with randos. Like never
I've played Powered by the Apocalypse with randos, and there was someone there that made it fucking suck because of the popcorn initiative.
Well, like not even just the popcorn initiative. Like never mind it.
So bad.
Yeah, like never mind the anxiety of running for random people. This game actively rewards the loudest voice, which a number of rules lights just kind of do. And that's not like a design philosophy thing. It's like we want everyone to sit there and like pound their chest. No, it's just a thing that happens whenever you make things light. Is there's not enough weighing those people down to sit there and let other people grab the spotlight. So, like, for the example of combat, Popcorn Initiative, like, if I were doing this as a pop-up game for random people, we go to this Popcorn Initiative. The downside is, unless I use an optional rule, which is every player gets 3 actions, that's maximum, or I arbitrate, they can just keep saying, now I do X. Like, I understand policing players is technically kind of the GM's job. But there are some folks when, like, they come back from a game and say, hey, I don't feel like I did too much. The system exacerbates it in a couple ways. For one example, there are enemy types in the game that are affected by a certain kind of damage. There are only 2 damage types, physical and magical. Now, mind you, you can have weapons that do physical or magical, and it can scale with any one of your attributes. That's cool. That's a positive. But if you aren't able to do, like, if you're fighting a ghost, it's primarily affected by magical damage. If you're the warrior with a non-magical weapon, you're going to do next to no damage. And at the end of the day, optimally, again, I bring up the optimally word, if you don't do that damage type or just have low damage numbers, in certain combats, it's just best for you not to take an action. Because the way combat works is that if a player rolls fail or fear, so if the result is highest with fear or if they just outright fail, which really ends up being 75% of the rolls, that's just an estimate, then it passes.
Certainly felt that way.
Yeah, it passes the turn to the GM. Don't play optimally.
And imagine being that player who wanted to take a turn, failed their roll, turned it over to the enemy turn, and caused the enemy to basically win the combat.
Yeah, and like I brought that up at one point in one of the streams that we were talking about, and community members' response to that was, "Oh, just skip your GM turn." I'm like, okay, cool, but then combat has no stakes, and players aren't punished for like actions at all. Because at that point, why am I doing combat if I'm going to not have the bad guys attack the good guys?
Yeah,
off recording.
You don't need to roll dice if that's what you're trying to do, which is fine.
Yeah.
Freeform RP is a thing, and it's very fun. But in my opinion, but like,
which
this is obviously a game system.
Yeah.
Off recording, Brandon and I discussed this a little bit after the third part of our playtest, and yeah, I mean, if the actual answer is to essentially just fudge things in favor for the players anytime things start looking bad, what is the point of having combat? Combat already is pretty low risk because the players can choose to not die. And don't get me wrong, I am a proponent of fudging things when it makes for a better story, both for and against the players. I generally don't fudge things to be against the players, but I will occasionally give a little slack where it may not be necessary, just
Yeah.
because it feels appropriate. But if the solution to enemies acting too much is to just, I'm going to give you guys a breather, what could eventually happen, and I'm not saying it will happen, but in some groups it's a higher likelihood, um, is that if you pull your punches in one combat, and then down the line you're not pulling your punches in another combat, how do you think your players are going to feel? Or how are you as a player going to feel? Because your GM is, going back to this theme, not being consistent.
Yeah.
Because when we play a game, we have expectations of the rules of engagement as far as the actual playing, the rolling, how combat goes, the results of things. We have expectations, and those expectations create a consistency within this gameplay loop. But if your GM sometimes pulling punches, sometimes not pulling punches is the thing, it creates an inconsistency at that meta level. And that can become frustrating because what if you are doing a sort of dungeon crawl and the GM has been pulling punches in every single encounter leading up to the final boss, and then they don't pull any punches whatsoever and just fucking pace the party? You know, how is that really going to feel? Because there are going to be groups where there is going to be a player who's going to be like, "Oh, take it easy on us," or whatever. You weren't, playing this hard earlier or whatever. It might give people that feeling of the GM is being antagonistic, or the GM might be, dare I say, railroading the party. And I have had that in my own game where I was running an enemy, a player engaged the enemy one-on-one, and it did not go their way. I didn't fudge anything. The fight just didn't go their way, and I was accused of railroading. But now add that fudging element. Well, it's not fudging, but because you're engaging with the system's rules, but they're using the rules to swing things in the party's favor and then not swing things in the party's favor. You're going to have players that are going to feel that way, that the results are being railroaded and the choices don't matter because the GM is deciding whether to push to affect the players or not.
Yeah,
And that will make some players feel like, why am I bother playing the game? If I'm going to reach the GM's conclusion anyways, why does what I decide matter? Because if the GM wants me to succeed, I'll succeed. If they don't want me to succeed, I will fail.
Yeah, I feel like the philosophy that they're going for, the answer to a lot of their questions, has basically been do things that don't involve using a game system. And I think in the context of this being a game system, like the question that these answers are answering isn't should I play this or should I just do freeform? Question is, what if this happens? How do we handle that in this system? So obviously not using a system isn't an option in here. And I say this as someone who, so like I love all the Critical Role people, and I don't know what level their involvement is in the actual design of this and stuff. So, but like I'm not gonna trash talk anyone in particular. But I think saying something like, "Oh, just have the enemies not attack," or "Oh, just stop trying to optimize," when someone just is asking about, "I just want to make the best decisions possible." In my opinion, that's a cop out. Like that's just not a real answer.
yeah, like I agree with that. And one of the things that like I also want to point out, like from the GM side of the screen, there are a number of things attached to the system, and I thought I was losing my mind at one point. But at one point in the 1.2 version of the rules, it told me that if I wanted to make something dramatic happen or change the scene in a dramatic way, to spend a resource, to spend a fear token. I don't need to do that. I shouldn't need to do that. Like, I understand, because one of the things that it describes as an example was the use of, oh, I didn't say there was a storm here earlier. Let me spend a fear, and now there's a storm as they're climbing up this decrepit castle. That's going to add, problems to the mix.
I think that was a literal example, by the way. It's not something he's just pulling out of his ass.
Yeah, and like, mind you, they removed that from being something you could spend fear on and made it as part of just like normal GM actions in the in the version 1.3. So, it's not necessarily like a complaint, but it was one of those things. Like, there are other examples of that in the system where it's just like, do you want to change the scene? You need to spend a resource. Like, one of the current examples is an environment action, because like they give some guidelines on environments and like things that you could have there that could be dangers or encounters. One of them is straight up spend 2 actions to summon 2 eagles that are nesting nearby to harass the party. Which means
That's hilarious.
It is, but I don't need to spend action tokens for that. I shouldn't need
No,
to.
no, you don't. Just the
Well,
mental
and
image
I
is so
also-
funny. I'm sorry.
No, it is funny.
I also take qualm with it because gamifying the GM role will increase the likelihood of that sense of antagonism between the players and the GM. Because now it's not the GM is narrating the events of the game. Now it's the GM has decided on a whim or otherwise, I'm going to spend these tokens and I'm going to make this thing happen.
Yeah, the GM basically has resources they can use to hurt you, and they're encouraged to do so.
Yeah, and it's a challenge being thrown at the players. And some groups may not have issue with this, but it is a very gamified way of engaging as a GM. And to some players, it's going to read as like a board game style antagonism where it's not the GM is enhancing the story or telling a story. It's the GM is, or this opponent, this other player is throwing, a drawback at me, throwing a challenge at me. They're trying to stop me from succeeding. And that's not to say all players are going to read it that way, but there are players who might feel like this is antagonistic. And this hypothetically is something that could happen a lot because, talking about how often fear comes up and fail comes up, a GM is going to pile up fear tokens. And at the end of some of these playtest sessions, Brandon, you pointed out how much fear you had piled up and you weren't using all of it because it didn't feel necessary to use it all, but you still had it.
Yeah.
And all it takes is for a GM to sit there and be like, well, I have all this fear. I should be using it. Because with all that fear, you could sit there and be like, no, you guys are only going to get one action in between the enemies acting. I'm going to keep spending fear to interrupt y'all's initiative and keep coming into the initiative. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to trigger environment shit and just keep activating things. And as we continue to roll fear, you can just continue to do stuff. They talk about how hope is a resource you should be constantly spending because of how easily you can get it. But the same extends to fear because it operates the same way. It flows in just as easily. And he's one guy collecting fear off of the entire party.
Also,
so his fear pool is going to be a lot bigger than one player's hope pool.
A lot of things that cost hope also cost more than one.
Yeah.
And I don't know how big the fear pool can be because I haven't GM'd it, but you can only have 6 hope at a time as a player. I don't know if that scales. It might.
I think I can have 10. I haven't read version 1.3. Also, his example of using fear to interrupt PC turns is not something that is just like he made up. That is in version 1.3. That is the first
Yeah.
example. Interrupt the
That's also-
PCs during combat to take action.
The amount of actions the GM can take with fear is enormous. I didn't even know about that one at the time we were playing. But like, so you can also, I guess, to get into a bit of combat stuff. I'll come back to this more later because I have a long thing I want to talk about with it. But you can, when you're on the enemy action or the GM action, they can spend a fear to get 2 more actions.
Yeah.
And I think you can actually do them more than once at a time.
Yes.
And that's in addition to being able to just interrupt players' actions to go. So, like, no
Yeah.
matter how few or how many enemies there are, they can just act a lot with
And
fear.
and one of the big things, like the game, at least in version 1.3, I didn't reread through all of it in version 1.3. In 1.2, they pointed this out. In version 1.3, I didn't reread to see if they changed that stance or not, but I kind of doubt it. It is advised to not let enemies take more than 1 action.
That actually
So
plays into like a tirade I wanted to, not tirade, but like I have a long thing. But go on.
I have a document written up and I'm skipping like 80% of it because
Okay.
it starts getting shitty.
Oh yeah.
Because I found GMing this frustrating. Not even because it's like, oh, I don't have anything to do. I have too much shit to do. When you do things like rulings, not rules, well, guess what? When the players ask, how does this work? They turn to me and ask, how does it work? I look at the 400-page book, see that there's nothing giving me any direction, and go, well, now I got to figure it out.
This game has a 400-page rulebook.
The PDF, I believe, was 400 pages or something close to that.
How? What?
That's
Truly is a wonder.
I don't believe I think roughly 40% of it is being told how to GM.
Oh, okay.
And like a number of it is like, oh, you're new to GMing. Here's how GMing operates. Da 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 da. Which is fine. I think that's fine to have in any system. But there's just a lot that you have to arbitrate GM. Like if I was a fresh-faced 14-year-old opening this up, going to the GM section, going through this, and then playing with my buddies, and they kept asking me these questions. I had to deal with this popcorn initiative. I have someone complaining afterwards that, hey, I didn't get a chance to go.
Oh yeah, no. A group of teenagers, total nightmare situation.
Yeah.
I didn't even think
Yeah.
about that. This would be an
Nobody's
incredibly
gonna walk away
difficult
from this.
game to run if it's the first game you're running.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, don't let it be your first game that you run. It's like that's the point has been missed. It's just like there's so much that you have to arbitrate and be in charge of. You have to sit there, and if with doing popcorn initiative, if someone's like, and I take an action, and I take another action, and another, you can either let them keep going until they fail or fear, and then you get to take a turn and pass it back to the group, but possibly have this person pop back up and saying, and I keep going. Or you go, settle down.
That's what happened in that Powered by the Apocalypse game I was playing, basically.
Yeah,
This person just wanted all the attention. It was awful.
I'm not surprised. And you say, no, you settle down. Let's have one of the other people take a turn. At which point, it gets like, then you start having like above the table friction. Because you actively just told a player, stop. You've done enough. Let someone else have a turn. I make jokes about GMing. Like GMing, it's like, oh, I'm a parent. For like Rules Light, Powered by the Apocalypse, and for this system, it's more apparent because people that are like, I want the spotlight, can death grip that fucking thing.
Yeah. And it kind of goes in both directions too, where if you're highly inconsiderate of your fellow players, you can do that. And if you are very considerate of other players, if you're like me, where my primary thought is generally, all right, who hasn't gotten to go? This is a lot of it's anxiety, I'll admit, but like, I don't want to be taking up other people's time.
Yeah.
When I go, I only want to use my time, but the game doesn't tell me when my time is. Like, we have to collectively decide that. So it has to be a discussion every time a new turn comes up of like, oh, hey, does somebody else already want to go, or should I go? Or
And that's exhausting.
something. Yeah. And like, it's kind of extreme ends of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've found that the rules light systems that decide to err on rules light because they want to reduce time spent in the book or referring to rules or whatever, I find most of the time they trade that for table talk is what ends up happening. Because quite frankly, our combat for Daggerheart did not magically become faster.
No.
It took just as much time as a combat in another system would.
Took a little longer.
Like, because
in a
we're
game-
sitting there having to have we're having the discussion just something as basic as who's acting. Because if you do sit there and just let somebody do it without discussion, you do run that risk of, like you're saying, Syndra, somebody just hogging on the spotlight. Because realistically, everybody has an idea of what they want to do.
Yeah.
And like anybody hypothetically could sit there and just continue to act nonstop if you let them. But then you also run the issue that you do have the quieter players like yourself who don't want to like speak up and demand that they have a turn or whatever. That they could get run roughshod over by other players, and it may not even necessarily be intentional. Because I know some people are going to come in and say, "Oh, we'll have a session 0, set expectations." First of all, not every game has the luxury of having a session 0.
Nope.
Especially newer players may not even understand why it would be valuable to have a session 0, let alone even know that term. But that aside, you could sit there and lay down the expectations and everybody agree and understand and be on the same page, and somebody could unintentionally or just lack the social awareness or whatever and still sit there and do it and make that mistake. And they're not doing it out of malice or attention-seeking behavior, but they're just like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this, and just not give anybody else the chance. And
it might be well-meaning and just really excited.
Exactly. And as a GM, it does kind of feel shitty to have to sit there and play parent. Like, I imagine most groups do have occasionally a situation where the GM might have to step in and resolve something that might be interplayer or whatever. I know I historically have had to do it. But you don't want to sit there in the middle of a session, have to stop and have that conversation over combat.
Every time.
Like a lot of these, exactly. And the root of this problem could be solved with a simple have everybody roll and determine a turn order. They would save so much time in the grand scheme of things. Like, I imagine somebody is sitting there and be like, oh, you know it'd be so much better? Instead of stopping and rolling for initiative, we just do it popcorn style. But now we're coming back to well, actually, just taking the time to go ahead and roll the one time and establish the turn order could just be faster.
Not so bad.
Yeah, I don't know why that's in any kind of rules light or narrative first or whatever you want to call it systems. Why is initiative always like the first thing that goes? It's an extremely simple procedure, and it honestly speeds things up a lot compared to not doing it.
And from what I can gather, it comes from people chafing with having to stop the roleplay to handle mechanics, but for whatever reason, don't process having that discussion of how to resolve something or who gets to act next or whatever as stopping the role play. And I'm not sure why that disconnect exists, because you're doing the same thing. The role play is stopping and meta talk is happening.
It's just different.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I'm not speaking negatively of people who prefer to do that. That's fine. But me personally, it's the same thing. And honestly, I find having to have the discussion exhausting, because it's like, this is a basic function of the game. The fact that we have to stop and have a discussion about it, bro, just give me a rule. Let me have something be consistent so we don't have to have the discussion. If it takes a minute to handle it, but it's handled and we don't have to talk about it, please give me that. Because, good lord, I want to play the game. I don't want to talk about playing the game
I think
while I'm playing the game.
yeah. Speaking of consistency, I'm just going back to the rules versus rulings thing. Like, I think there's a degree of where like the way the game functions needs to be consistent from one game to the next. For any game where you're trying to, or where you want to build a community of people who play it, which, by the way, that's every game. It's all of them. That means that a single player is going to probably play at more than one table in their time of playing it. So going from one table to the next shouldn't be this major, like, mechanical culture shock where they suddenly don't know how to play anymore because the table just has different rulings, or like basically different house rules, even if those house rules are the same for that table all the time. Or even worse, like, one session to the next, the rulings change because they're not codified rules within one table. It just makes it difficult to, like, I feel like you never really know how to play the game if that's the case.
Yeah.
And
Does that make sense?
that's definitely my issue
that makes
with rulings over rule, because there is, your table may do it one, because that's, as part of that, communicating with other players that play the game. Think about over the years. This will especially click with D&D people, but people who play other systems will understand this as well. Think about over the years, going online, going on Twitter or Reddit or whatever platform you prefer. If you follow your game or whatever, and there are discussions that happen there about the game, uh, you're inevitably going to run into people who do interpret some things differently, even though, like, rules as written, it's like clearly intended to work this way. Some people might say, yeah, well, we don't do that or whatever at my table. That's going to be worse in a system like this because it's rulings over rules. So you can't go onto Twitter and ask, like, oh, how does this work or whatever, and it's like, well, we intended it this way, but your table can figure it out or whatever. You're going to get non-committal answers. And so when you do go between tables, there's very likely things are going to be handled differently. And it might be different enough where you may not even jive with that table. And that's why I'm like, rulings versus rule at a system-wide level is certainly a choice you can make, and one I don't agree with.
I mean, the rulings will happen anyway.
Exactly. But you're amplifying the amount of them, potentially the severity of them, and people will homebrew. They will have house rules, and it's going to compound. And then when you get into these community spheres where people are communicating about the game, sure, they're both talking about Daggerheart, but down the line, at some point in time, are they talking about the same gameplay experience? because of how much room for interpretation on top of the already foundational differences between tables that exist. And that can cause problems within a community because the community is going to argue about things. And if you're sitting there polling the community for feedback and everything, you're probably going to get mixed reports on things. You're probably not going to get a very unified voice in how people feel about things. And that's going to create problems when you want to design down the line. And that's why having this, why we point out the system feeling confused on who it's for is a problem, because eventually they're going to have to make that decision. And now, right now, it sounds like they're aiming for the very rules light, casual player base who don't want much to do with mechanics. They've definitely been favoring them with some of the progress it's been making. But like we said, you got a 400-page rulebook. I don't. While it is rules light, I also feel like calling it rules light is not appropriate.
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, we've got RPGs that the entirety of their rules are literally printed on one page, and most rules light systems don't push past 100 pages. And you've got a 400-page document. That might actually be larger than the player's handbook for D&D.
I'm honestly still very surprised the document is 400 pages long, because the base system of this game doesn't really provide any more depth to me than some of those games that have much, much smaller core rule sets.
Yeah, and like it's not 400 pages of rules. Like, make
Oh.
that clear. But it is. There's still a decent chunk of rules. Like it is a notable amount of rules. Calling it rules light isn't entirely appropriate, but I wouldn't really call it a mid-core game either. And that's why part of the reason why I say it's very confused in what it wants to be.
If I may.
Yeah.
Interject real quick. I have the page count. It's 377 pages, and that's before you count the stuff you would print off as the cards to hand to players.
Oh, okay.
But still.
This is still a pretty hefty book.
Fisk, did you want to weigh in on this? I know that the three of us been going.
No, go on.
Okay. And it's like, for me, just GMing the experience was not fun. And it's the reason why I realistically kind of pulled the players at one point. Is it's like, do we want to keep going? Because if I'm not jiving with the system and I'm not having fun with it, if everyone else is having a good time, I can suck it up. I can find my fun in it. But if everyone else is like, nah, we're not really feeling this, it's just like, cool, let's end this, move to something else. Like, even if we're recording, the entire, like, me and I know Zemian at one point read through a portion of the rules and you're like, this is kind of weird. Like, we don't know how we feel about this. This is weird. Want to see how that plays out. I don't know. And I proposed, and not I proposed. Zemian proposed. It's like, well, like it's a hot button topic. Let's play test it. Let's see how the community like reacts and see how the community develops during the play test. And in, I want to say, about a month, because I think we lost a week at one point, maybe 2.
Yeah.
But in about a month, they went from version 1.2 to 1.3, and the community seems really mixed on it. There's people that love it for what it is or what it's trying to do and its rules light. And then there are other individuals who it's like, I ran this and I could not have bounced harder. It's like they do some interesting things. There are some cool mechanics like the health having a threshold for you to take damage. You have evasion and an armor score, and you use your armor to sit there and reduce damage. I fucking love that. Is one of my favorite defensive built mechanics that I've seen for a game in a long time. However, it's attached to a mechanical system that feels lackluster, despite having a bunch of things attached to it that shouldn't make that happen. It's too finicky. It's too light. It's very airy. It just doesn't feel good. Like playing it, and I didn't really technically play it. I ran it. There were like a number of things that were really cool. I love some of the enemies. My favorite enemy that I think I've ran for a game in a long time is this mortal hunter that I used for the boss. They're a level 1 out of like 4 because their scaling is based on your level. And they're a leader. Their difficulty to hit was 16, so it's not impossible to hit, but you have to have some decent bonuses. Its hit was +5. It had a bunch of cool features. Like it did 2d20 physical damage to a person if it hit. That's kind of cool. You don't see that. You don't see the d20 get rolled for damage a lot in the games. So I really appreciated that. But it also has other things that plays the mechanics and other resources. Like it has terrifying presence. If it hits a PC, everyone within range loses hope. So more of resource tracking. The resources move a lot in this game, which is where I struggle with the idea. It's like, oh, this is light. It's not. There's a lot to fucking watch and track. And that's if the GM isn't tracking everybody else's shit. If I had to track everyone else's HP, armor, stress, and hope, I'd lose my marbles. I have to trust that you're all not fucking with me. Which is fine, because I trust this group, but for a group of randos, God no. I also could like spend fear and make a character not be able to use armor. I could sit there and say, hey, everyone in this area, you do half damage. Or I could walk through everybody and do an amount of damage. Like, they had a bunch of cool mechanics and it was very neat. But it's an enemy. I don't have to worry about skill rolls or anything like that. At the end of the day, I just swing buzzsaw. Yeah, that's.
I kind of relevant to that. Kind of why we were discussing it. There had been a thing sticking with me, and I have talked about it a little bit before. I think mostly off recording. But to me, I finally found the words to kind of help explain this feeling. But the system feels like between all of these different fiddly bits and the depth of like running the enemies from the GM end. Obviously, I didn't, but hearing Brandon talk about it and stuff, it sounds like you can do some really cool shit. There's a lot of options there and such. The feeling I have though is that the system wants to simulate challenge without committing to it and not having a real risk of meaningful failure. There's something to be said about non-death failure conditions. I'm absolutely a proponent of those. Death is not the end-all be-all failure state of a story. However, this is a very combat-focused system. Like, let's just call it what it is. There is even less than D&D 5th mechanics for social encounters. If you're going to have a social encounter, it is going to like boil down to probably just presence rolls, maybe the occasional knowledge roll, maybe an instinct roll here or there to like notice subtle things. But that is your interaction with social encounters. And you're going to tell me in this very combat focused system where 99% of the mechanics mostly apply in combat. Well, I shouldn't say 99%. It's more like probably 80 to 90% of the mechanics are tied into like combat. You're gonna tell me I can choose to not die. Players don't have to die, and it feels like a potentially unhealthy evolution of the failing forward ideology, which is a good ideology to have, but there is such a thing as taking it too far. Because if the players don't have to die, you are going to have players who are going to say, well, why don't we just go fight X? Let's just go fight. Let's just go fight. And realistically, they could potentially just brute force something. They could just keep throwing themselves at a problem unless you change story things so that brute forcing it is not an option. But there's not a sense of personal risk because most players, given the choice, are not going to say my character dies. Now, I do know there are players who absolutely are like, no, my character dies. There's a campaign Syndra and I participate in. We're playing Pathfinder. Our GM gave us every player has a fate point. If you would die, you could spend that fate point to survive. And you can choose to either stay out of the combat or whatever the situation is, or you return to consciousness with 1 HP. And if you die again, that's it. We have a player in our group who chooses to not use fate points. He had a character death. He brought in a new character into a session, and the character died that session, and he still chose to not use a fate point. So those people do exist, but the majority of people, if you give them that option, they're not gonna die. They're not gonna make that choice. And just between the hope system, the fear system, and this really like gamified way of the GM engaging, but then also being heavily advised to like pull your punches. And based off of the other information given in the GM section with the attitude on how to approach the game, it very much feels like they want you to do, as they say, this narrative forward thing where they want you to do what's best for the story, but really they expect you to run a game where the characters you create win in the end. Just flat out. It doesn't really feel like they, between spending fear tokens to like bring enemies in, trigger environment effects and stuff, it feels like they want to simulate the experience of a campaign with some handrails so that you're, in a sense, being railroaded, but it's obfuscated in a way to make it look like you're overcoming these challenges to reach the endpoint. And depending on your GM, you may actually have overcome challenges. But the way they're writing the system, because you could, as we talked about earlier, you could, as a GM, be very aggressive and be constantly spending fear and stuff. But they've made it pretty clear they don't intend for you to do that. It's suggested for you to pull punches, to not be using the full extent of your abilities as GM as presented in the rules. So they're going to give you the rules to do it, but then they're going to tell you not to. And so to me, it feels that way, that they are suggesting an obfuscated railroad to meet the end goal here. Because things could go wrong, but at the end of the day, this system wants you to win. And most systems do. There are systems that are designed to, you'll be lucky if you get out alive. Looking at you, Alien.
Yeah, no shit.
Or Call of Cthulhu, or whatever else. But I honestly, playing this game, I don't know in a long running campaign if I would honestly feel satisfied by the end of that game. Just looking at this system and seeing how it wants to be ran and the philosophy behind it, because it does very much feel like it wants to be just a feel good. Well, of course the players are going to win. Of course things are going to go their way. Sure, some bad things may happen along the way, but it's not in doubt what the end of this campaign looks like. At the start of the game, you have a sense of how this is going to end, especially if you discuss what the campaign is going to be about ahead of time. And for me, that kind of kills any sense of wonder or enjoyment in that journey, because sure, the journey is fun. And for the most part, it is about the journey. But how much fun is the journey if I know where it's going to end necessarily? Because like character death can be something really fun, but also like failure in some serious ways can be really fun. And if you have the ending already decided, what does some of the challenges in the middle matter? Because if it's all going to loop back around to the same endpoint, what's the point?
It kind of makes me feel less like it's like a game campaign and more like the theme park rides where you're on like the cart that's on a track going through an environment, usually indoors, with just like stuff happening around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels
It's
like
just a theme
that,
park ride.
sort of.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I just wanted to specify, not like a roller coaster. But,
Yeah.
Oof.
And some people may be fine with that. I've heard about players that are like,
that
yeah,
was
I don't
actually
care
what I
if we're
was
being
thinking.
railroaded. I'm just here to like hang out with my friends or whatever, and that's fine if that's what people are about. But me personally, this system seems to lean way too much, despite like fear and everything. It seems to lean way too much in the players succeed. Like, sure, you're gonna fail, you're gonna succeed at a cost, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, you're gonna win anyways. Like,
Even though it seems to give the GM a lot of tools to like make you not succeed, and kind of does play the GM against the players as like an opposing player.
yeah. Like if you're gonna do the stereotypical campaign and you have to go fight the big bad lich, the big bad lich can't kill you. The big bad guy can't do anything to stop you. They can delay you, they can slow you down, but as far as like the progression and how you can choose not to die and all of this, they can do literally anything but stop you. Inevitably, you're going to kill them. It's not a question. You will win in the end. So long as you have chosen that we're going to stop the big bad guy, you're going to win. Because they can't kill you. The GM cannot kill you.
You're just
If you
immortal.
make a stupid decision and run into a cave by yourself, and you're level 1 and it's a bunch of level 20 enemies, you can't die. The GM cannot say you're dead. Because the rulebook has stated you have total control over your character in that respect, and you can choose to not die. So regardless of what happens to you, if you get hit by a disintegrate spell, you're not dead. You're just hurt. You're just unconscious.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could like trap you in a hole forever or something like that, but
Yeah.
I mean, no one who's
And it's
trying to
like-
run a game is gonna do that.
And I think there can be some fun stuff you can do with that. I'm not going to say it's all bad. For the most part, I think it's a terrible idea to have it baked into the game that way as just an option instead of like a key part of the setting. Because you could, as a homebrew setting, well, the player, like, you just take the option away from the players and say, yeah, you're immortal, you can't die. And make that a plot element. Like, there are cool things you can do with that. But it's not presented that way in the system. It is presented as a choice in a general fantasy setting that you can just choose your character to not die because you don't want to deal with that or you don't want that outcome or whatever. So you're free to make as many stupid decisions as you want. You can just recklessly throw yourself at whatever. Um, if you don't really care about other negative outcomes, as long as you don't die, you can do whatever you want without consequence.
Just become a Dark Souls character.
And yeah, it's
Hunt, must hunt.
it's a quintessential issue I have. Like, I can, to a degree, understand character death. Some players just do not take it well, and I understand and respect that. Codifying it as a rule is a problem. If you want to talk about it in the GM section and be like, hey, talk to your players. If they're really going to be objectionable to character death, handle it on a case by case basis. Because it's also like, especially in some systems, it is hard for your character to actually just die in some systems. But I also think the characters don't necessarily die is a side effect of how combat works in this system. Because, like, an enemy Brandon was running in part 3, hypothetically, could just two-shot any one of us. They're rolling 2d20 for damage on one of their attacks. Like, as a level 3 druid, my severe damage threshold is 20, and I have 4 armor. If they roll a 24 damage, I'm not stopping that with my 4 armor and knocking it down to major. If that happens twice, I'm down, potentially dead.
Well,
You know, it's very easy to get two-shot in the system when you're fighting an enemy that actually throws some dice or actually can hit you. But then you also have like a bunch of enemies that really aren't threats to the player characters, which is fine. But
like, and they have rules for that.
This is not a system I generally would want to play. If it was a one shot, maybe, but overall, no. Especially like with this sense of the challenge isn't real; it's simulated. I don't like necessarily getting my teeth kicked in constantly as a player. I'm not advocating for that. It shouldn't. A game does not have to be a grudging agony fest of L after L after L. But there needs to be L's for the W's to count. If we're just going to coast through and it's just win after win after win, to me it doesn't feel earned in the game. There has to be consequences to things. There has to be a reason for me to pause and think about what I'm doing. And you can do that through story with NPCs and other consequences, but at a personal level, at the end of the day, that is like the most core sense of consequence is, you know, do I think I'm going to survive this? Because let's be honest, most D&D parties, that is a general question. A lot of times the consequences are just party death. Or just multiple players dying. Or even just one.
I think there is something to be said about, like, even if you don't deal with character death very well, okay, your character can't die, so you don't have to worry about that. It's still just like, you can still fail at a lot of things all the time, and that doesn't feel good either. And the system kind of doesn't give you a lot of agency. If you're rolling dice, the likelihood of failure in this system is so high.
Yeah,
Even
that's not even challenge. That's just dice fucking you.
Yeah, well, that's just like the combination of giving the GM fear, especially if you're in combat, because it sends the actions away from the party, um, which I'm gonna roll back to.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a minute.
And just like it's a system without very big bonuses to your rolls, which is fine, but like, so your stats don't really affect the dice rolls that much. Um, and I don't know. There's just a lot of factors where like obviously if there are dice, your agency as a player is reduced. That's part of the point because you don't 100% succeed at everything you attempt to do. But even I feel like in this system where they're trying to give as much narrative agency to people as possible, I think a lot of it is taken away by just using the system.
Yeah, and like one of the things like in this conversation that I've kind of put together is there are a lot of rules for the GM. There is just a lot of rules that the GM has to follow or think about or be a part of. 1 second, because I'm actually looking at something specific. There we go. So, of the 377-page document, 160 of them pertain to players. The rest is towards the GM.
It's like a little less than half.
Um,
Unless I'm just doing my math.
well,
Wrong.
it's over 200 pages. Like 217 pages are dedicated to the GM GMing.
Yeah.
Compared
There
to
is
the
something that I do like in
yes,
the system, and that is the proficiency.
yes,
How it
Yeah, it's actually
scale,
kind of cool.
how it makes things scale, and I wish it made more things scale.
yeah.
Uh, but it's pretty cool, and honestly, it should probably have been baked into the skills as well. That proficiency, you have a certain number of skills that get bonuses from proficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for those
Sorry.
real quick, for those who don't know how the proficiency works, because we haven't really gone over it, the way proficiency worked is that on a scale of 1 to 6, you were proficient in something. You started at 1, you moved up to 6. If you did damage with a thing, if you're able to do damage with it, you're proficient in it. So, like, you don't have to be, it's like, oh, I need to be skilled at using a short bow, but I'm skilled in using a short sword. None of that. If you do damage with it, you have proficiency dice in it. What that means is it's a multiplier to that thing's damage. For example, some spells, such as Fireball, scale with proficiency. So, the way it was codified, and I think this is a clarity thing that they have to touch up on, is like you do D8 damage. It's blank D8, doesn't say 1D8, doesn't say 2D8, it just says D8. What that means in the rules is you do that much dice with your proficiency.
So if you have 2 proficiency, it's 2d8.
Yep.
That is something that I wish they would clarify more, because just looking at the stat card when it says d8 compared to 1d8, that's easy to mix up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have caught that if we weren't literally playing on Demiplane, where it just did that for us.
Yeah, and the GM has just so much more rules that they have to contend with. Like mind you, that's not unusual for a GM to have that, but when it feels like they took the rules that players would have to be worried about and shoved it over to the GM and said, "Okay, congratulations, you're not really a player here. You at this table are not playing this game. You are directing it. And when disagreements or questions come up, you answer it because we don't have the answers for you, and that's on you to figure out."
Well, and I have opinions on why it is designed and framed in that way. Because I think it's shaped after a certain style of doing things, which, in my opinion, is a bad idea for most tables. I
Agreed.
think this idea that the GM is responsible for all the players, is responsible for all the back end things, is responsible for X, Y, and Z. I think it's horrible. You know, I like, nobody starts off as like a great GM. Everybody kind of has their shit GM phase. GMing is not something you're just magically good at. You can read as many books, listen to as many docu-series or whatever you want to call them on YouTube about GMing, read as many theses as you want. At the end of the day, no amount of preparation will prepare you for actually running a game like running games will prepare you. It is a skill that you will constantly improve at. There has never been a perfect GM. Since we're talking about Darrington Press, Matt Mercer, good GM, he's not perfect, and he'll be the first one to tell you he's not perfect. Everybody can acknowledge he's a great GM. That doesn't mean he has mastered it, because there is no such thing as being a perfect GM because we're human. We make mistakes. Trying to be a perfect GM, not a great idea, but it is something you are always learning and improving upon, and that's how you become a great GM. That said, the players are playing the game. The players need to have responsibilities. They need to know how their abilities work. It should not be the GM's job to know how your character works for you. It's not the GM's job to take notes for you. It's not the GM's. It should there's such an onus on the GM to manage and run everything. It's not fair to them to make them responsible for everything about playing a game. They should not have to be constantly reminding the player the rules of the game. They should not have to be responsible for teaching the players the game, unless that is your group's dynamic and you're all on the same page about that. But to flat out just have that expectation is kind of, in my opinion, fucked up.
I mean, rulings over rules also kind of means that the GM is making up the system as they go along.
Which is awful, quite frankly. It's one of the issues I have with it. Because at the end of the day, the players have a seat at the table. They have a responsibility for everybody else's fun, including the GM. The GM is a player as much as everybody else is.
Yeah.
And that should be respected because the GM needs to be having fun too. And if you're listening to this and you've only been a player and you've never considered your GM having fun, maybe take some time and reflect on that. And it's not necessarily saying you're an asshole for not thinking about it. It's a thing a lot of players don't necessarily think about, and it shows. If you go online and look, you will find people who are like, they're GMs, they're running this system, and I'm not saying this system isn't Daggerheart. I'm saying this system in general. They're running a system, they're not having fun with it, they're very frustrated by it, and they want to play something else. And they're like, I don't know what to do. It's like, talk to your players. And a lot of times the answer is the players only want to play this system. They don't want to play anything else, but I hate it. And I would rather run something else.
I mean,
as a player, you're doing this with your friends, hopefully. Your friend having fun should be a factor. And as a player, you have a responsibility to know the rules, know how your character works, and do all this stuff. And you're working with the GM. The GM is not your fucking babysitter. They're not your computer spitting out a video game at you. This is a collaborative gaming experience.
I mean, even if you are like a totally heartless bastard as a player, I mean, think about it like this: if your GM isn't having fun, they're probably going to stop running the game at some point.
Yep.
So we're not saying you're an asshole, but if you are, and you only think about yourself, you should still be thinking about your GM having fun.
Yeah, because they're just eventually burn out.
Yeah. But the second part of my point is having all these pages of rules for the GM. I know a large section of it is not rules; it's GMing advice. And don't get me wrong, having some there is a good idea. But at a point, it kind of becomes wasted words. I do believe in putting out your own experiences out there, but if you've never GM'd, like I said, no amount of explaining GMing to somebody is going to prepare them for it. And I really feel like this book has laid out a very specific way of running games from a very specific perspective of running games. And I think that's a bad idea. Because in my own experience, if you try to purely emulate somebody else's GMing style, you're more likely or not going to run into issues. Um, if you're going to be a GM, and I would love to like do like a whole ass episode talking about just being a GM and stuff, and finding your style and what you like and don't like and all that. But as a short version, if you're going to GM, by all means, look at resources, do that reading, do whatever research you want to do. It's not a bad idea to do it. Just understand, just because you've done it does not mean you know everything. And you will often find, no matter how much preparation you've made,
Never
you're
enough.
not going to be prepared. The players are always going to do something you don't expect them to do, to some degree. Something is always going to happen that you didn't necessarily plan for. The only real way, and like a lot of people get afraid of GMing because they're like, oh, I don't know, like I don't think I have the ability to do it or whatever. Look, you don't know unless you do it. And honestly, if you do it once and you're like, oh, I'm just really bad at it. Well, yeah, you done it once. But go build a car. Oh, you did it once and you're really bad at it? Well, yeah, you haven't built a car before. You're going to be bad at it. It is a skill. It's not something you just pick up and just do, and some people are magically good at it. Same thing with art. You're not magically good at art. Some people might have a natural inclination for it, but anybody can learn to do art. Same thing with GMing. Anybody can pick it up and learn to do it. It just takes experience. Nothing is going to replace spending the time doing it. And having a GM section this long trying to preach to you about the right way to run this game or whatever is not the answer. You just need to do it. And there is a degree of like certain systems demand a certain level of like a certain expectation on a GMing. Like Alien, for example. There are some things of like running the Alien RPG where it's like it was designed in a way that it's like cool. If you're not cool with random results that could just outright kill your players as a GM, you might not want to run that game because that's an expectation of the system. And if you break that, then the system's not necessarily going to work as intended. But the system is also not preaching to you on other things. So it's... I can respect some of the ideas in the GM section, but I'm not trying to be preachy about this, but there is a degree of speaking from a certain perspective that is, I would say, not healthy to somebody who would potentially be new to running games. Because that is always a perspective you need to look at for a tabletop RPG. What happens if this is somebody's first tabletop RPG book they picked up? So yeah.
All right, I think we've kept Syndra contained long enough. Syndra, you said you defined it as a tirade earlier, and I'm interested to hear it.
Oh, I mean, you've already heard it, but tirade's probably not correct. I was just expecting it to be a long explanation because of how I explain things. It was on the subject of combat, though I think it might end up applying to other things as well. And I think it kind of wraps together the issues with Popcorn Initiative and the general action economy or lack thereof and such. So it is suggested to the GM that each enemy only acts once per, I guess per round. That's actually something I wanted to bring up too. I don't believe a combat round is defined in any particular way.
Nope.
And it probably should be, especially, they have that suggestion there, like act once per what? There is, that said though, there is no such suggestion for players. As we've already stated, one player can act more than once, right after themselves if they want to, etc. Unless they either fail their roll, so if they miss or fail to manifest a spell or whatever, or roll with fear, so succeed or fail, their fear die is higher than their hope die. The actions then go to the GM. I believe this makes it so that it is optimal in any combat for whoever has the best bonus in that particular combat, which it will probably be the same person every time, but maybe some combats just have different circumstances than others. It is optimal to have that one person be the only one taking actions all the time, because so you can't control, you can't change hope or fear from anything other than the 50-50 it already is, but you can at least make yourself less likely to fail by making your primary stat better. So someone is going to be less likely to fail than others, or you'll be tied or whatever, but it's possible for that to be different. And I think this presents many problems. One of them is sort of a just thematic thing. Obviously, I know a game system is not meant to be a simulation most of the time. At least this kind of it isn't. It is a storytelling tool. That said, as the kind of tool it is, it should be representative of the kind of narrative you're trying to portray. So the rules and what they allow should correlate with, generally, with what's possible to do. And the number of actions you can possibly take in a given combat is a zero-sum game. Like, however long that combat takes, it'll take so many actions for the players to finish it up. And it's possible for one person to get all of them. Like, there isn't an even split of actions among everybody, just no matter what. So, but in like real life or in a video game or anything, like say like Fisk's character is just like the best person to act right in this combat, so we want them to do all of the fighting right now. Me not acting doesn't actually, like, why is there a cause and effect connection for that? Like, why do they get to exist at double speed because I'm standing here doing nothing? That doesn't make sense. Like, or triple speed if both Zemi and I do that, etc. And the other problem this creates is an encouragement for one person to participate more than other people. And we talked about already how that could just end up being a possibility if somebody had trouble sharing the spotlight. But it actually is like, if everyone is trying their best to just do well, and even if you're not, like, the game encourages this because of how it works, it is actually just better to do that. It's a cooperative game where everybody gets together for a few hours to play the game, but the best way to do it, due to how the game is created, is for only one person to have fun. And I don't think that's a good thing, because it's supposed to be a collaborative game.
Yeah.
And it can feel really bad if you are the one who causes the like the action to go to the GM and get everyone beaten up really badly or something. For example, so like even if you're as a group not trying to optimize it, it could actually be the like, oh man, I'm not very confident about my chances here. You go again. Could be a very common feeling that people could have. So like people could feel encouraged to not act and not play the game because
That
of how the
happened
game
in
is
our
designed.
playtest.
Yeah, it absolutely did. That
spent
was actually something that happened in the first session.
even the last session you weren't there for. I spent 80% of the session rolling with fear. Like I had like 1 or 2 hope rolls at the beginning, and then the rest of the session I rolled with fear until like the last 3 rolls.
Yeah. Oh, I meant the
There was a
compared to the
combat
game.
we were in where I straight up told Fist to just go because I had already rolled with fear and failed twice
Yeah.
in the combat, and I was just like, "Fuck it, you just go," because I'm
And I think
probably
like
just gonna fail again.
yeah, like it doesn't even the rolling with fear in general, with like how bad it is, can make it makes me not want to roll dice. And this isn't the first system I've played that made me not want to roll dice, and that's like the worst feeling. Because I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh, I just don't want to act because the bad things happen when I act. Like Powered by the Apocalypse is like that too. Or, like enemies just they don't have their own turns. They kind of have responses to what you do based on how you roll. And you rolling badly means they like get to counter you and hit you back. At least in the module I was playing for it, I don't know if that is part of the core system or if it changes based on one or the other. So it's like, oh, if I don't want to like get hit, I just don't play. And I think anything that can encourages you to not play is like not good in a game. But in our first session, we were fighting those like Thieves Guild guys, and I was surrounded by 3 of them. There was a moment, I don't remember who said it, but someone was like, "Hey, Syndra should go more times because I'm in a position where it's actually just better for me to act more." But that also means that success comes at the expense of other people getting to participate.
Well, it was also a situation of you were surrounded by multiple enemies by yourself.
Yeah, it was
And
kind of like across a plaza. If anyone hasn't listened to that.
yeah, and that's kind of an issue because we're sitting there, we're in a fight. It's all technically one combat, but we're in these 2 different areas, and it's like, eh, this situation you could replicate it in other ways, but it's ultimately it's one combat, and we have to choose between giving you a chance to defend yourself or stopping the guys who are trying to get away.
Yeah, when realistically we could just both do those at the same time, or more than one person.
Exactly. Because now it's like, oh, well, we let you go, and then, shit eventually happens where, your actions are lost, and then the guys we're fighting get to fucking act. And it's like, well, fuck me. We're standing here freeze frame for like what would be in like D&D terms 12 or 18 seconds, not doing anything because you're doing
Yeah,
stuff.
like which just doesn't make any sense and it feels awful. So
Yeah.
in my opinion, like I think this could all be rectified unbelievably easily. Like just define a combat round, just as you don't even have to say how long it is in game. Some games it varies based on the narrative and such, but just like okay, say every character gets to act once each combat round. Maybe unless they're like a boss and they have an ability to let them act more or something. To help with the action economy if you're only fighting one guy, whatever. Um, Players and enemies only get to act once each round. Even if you want to popcorn it and do it at whatever order you want to go in, at the very
Yeah.
least, everyone gets to act no matter what.
Yeah.
And so everyone gets to play the game, everyone gets to have fun. Like, I feel like I'm trying not to just rag on the game, but I think when my critique of the game is, damn, it'd be nice if everyone got to play, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. Because there really is nothing stopping you, especially with how it can snowball of being like player 1 goes, fails, or fear roll.
Yeah.
Boss goes, I'm going to hit you for that 2d20 attack. Oh, shit. I hit you for severe damage. Another player gets to go.
No,
They
not even
roll
another
with
player
fear.
gets to go. Like the GM could spend fear and give that boss 2 more actions.
Oh, sure. But, like, let's be generous and say they're not going to
Yeah.
go super hard. Next player could go, roll with fear. Boss goes again, does the same attack on the same guy. Oh, look, severe damage threshold again. That guy's out of the fight. Next.
It's like, thanks for
And
getting
it,
killed by playing.
yeah, and it could just fucking snowball. And I can understand from a narrative standpoint of being like, oh well, if the player characters like make a mistake in the fight, it gives the enemy an advantage that they could take advantage of and act. And like narratively, okay, cool, but it is going to snowball. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's part of the reason why that player characters don't die or they don't have to die is a rule as a safety net against that happening instead of just, quite frankly, not being lazy and having an initiative system.
Yeah, just
Because to
making
me,
that
that's what it
valuable
feels
happen.
like.
Well, because
Yeah.
enemies are just flat out more powerful than players by virtue of being NPCs and not having to deal with the hope, fear, action passing thing.
Yeah.
So like they exist within different physics and like expression of time than the players do just arbitrarily
Oh, and they
to
also
their advantage.
they also mechanically do because they roll d20. They roll a single d20 and not 2d12.
Yeah.
Which like obviously 2d12 is more likely to roll higher, but the having
Sure.
fear be a possibility every single time. And there are other games that have a similar system. If you look at Genesis or Star Wars, same system. Genesis came after it. If you don't know about it, it's interesting. Look it up. You can they have a unique dice system, but you can roll with there are successes and failures that basically cancel each other. That can come up on the dice, but then there are also what are they? Advantages and threats. The names differ between Star Wars and Genesis, but they
It's
mean the same thing.
disadvantage and threat, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh wait, no. What's the? Okay, yeah. There's advantage and disadvantage, and there's like triumph and threat. I think are the crit ones
Well, the crit
on the
ones
big
are a
dice.
triumph and despair.
That's it. Yeah. Point is though, like there is a succeed at a cost system there. Um, and succeed and get more stuff system, but it doesn't like it actually is succeed at a cost rather than
Yeah.
succeed, but also have everything go to shit.
It's a bit
Because
more involved than succeed at a cost.
yeah, but like you can
It,
succeed and have disadvantages rolled, and then like stuff happens that might not be great, but it's not like, oh, your entire party's action economy is completely thrown out of whack, and now the enemies get to act 5 times in a row and kick your ass because you rolled.
Yeah, no,
Wh-
you still
wh-
establish an initiative in Genesis, and then you as the players can decide who acts at what time in that initiative. Everybody still acts. But for an example, if you are playing like Realms of Terranoth or whatever, be it a homebrew setting or whatever, and you have a healer, you can choose to have your healer act in the bottom of the initiative so they can respond to damage coming through and heal players. Um, or you can choose to have like, well, we're gonna wait for a sniper or whatever to take his shot, and you're like playing Star Wars or whatever. Then they can act first. Uh, there's decision making there without completely getting rid of an actual like action economy with initiative and everybody getting to act while still having that
Yeah,
narrative flow of getting to choose who goes when.
yeah. I think there's definitely
Uh,
some good kind of tactical and narrative benefit to the players getting to choose what order they themselves go in. And Genesis, in my opinion, has a pretty good hybrid solution to it. I guess to specify more, basically you roll initiative like you would imagine for D&D or something. And the initiative values that everyone rolls are essentially like, okay, every spot on the initiative tracker that was rolled by a player is like a player slot. And the same goes for enemies, and like the GM decides what order the enemies go within those slots, and the players decide among themselves what order they go within their own slots. So you still have a benefit to having like a good initiative roll because you're more likely to go before the enemies, but you have that choice to order how the party acts so you can synergize better with each other or just narratively have things go a certain way.
Synergy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I'm not personally the biggest fan of like Genesis, but that's because of some things that like Genesis executes on.
Yeah, I would love to do a review of Genesis at some point because I have some thoughts. There are there are bits that I really like, and there are bits that I find kind of frustrating.
Oh, absolutely. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think like there were a few parallels that I found between this and that I think
Yeah,
Genesis just made it
absolutely.
easier to explain my thoughts.
Just want to make sure you're still here. Didn't want to be pushing you out of
Actually,
conversation. I'm sorry.
no, I'm just dealing with my illness stuff.
Gotcha.
I'm listening.
Um,
Saving my voice.
but yeah, so I think we should like we've talked about plenty of like things we liked about the game, things we didn't like about the game. Like one of the things I do want to bring up were something I didn't like about the game, and this is a recent change. This is as of version 1.3. They made a change to Nomad or Wonderborn.
Yeah,
And I bring this up also for Ali's sake as well.
Oh, I missed this because I wasn't in that session.
Oh yeah.
So, what Wonderborn used to do in version 1.2 was you essentially, once per session, got to say, I have an item that is needed. Like, I have this specific, like, edge case item that I can talk to the GM and say, hey, do I have this? Yes.
Yeah, realistically, it's a low-cost item. It's not like some MacGuffin or whatever. It's in our specific situation, he needed a screwdriver. That's what he was trying to pull out, and then he realized they had changed it.
Yeah, but before that, he needed masks to sit there and kind of, like, keep out poison gas. And they had that. They changed it to now, as the Wonderborn, you are part, like, your background, your community was a nomadic group of people moving from place to place. What they changed it to is that you now draw at random from the community card deck. And for that session, that is the bonus you get. That is a choice.
Problematic.
Yeah.
How I would describe it.
Like,
I can't remember if it was on recording that I brought this up or if it was after.
I don't know, but I was about to bring it up. It's kind of yeah, disregard nomadic culture overall that way. And
Yeah, like first of all, that.
yeah, that's
And
kind
mechanically
of
also that's just kind of pointless to have.
like mechanically that's like okay, fucking why? That's terrible. So it's like if you could end up in a situation, it's like, oh yes, this is a social encounter session. What do I have? I have a +2 to combat. Or I have dark vision. It's
Somehow.
yeah, randomly getting dark vision is fucking hilarious, but I'm not gonna get into that. Like it's
Having a +2 to combat it would be busted actually in combat too. Like, that sounds
yeah.
super swingy.
Well, like I don't know as an actual example. I didn't look at all the community cards because
okay.
they changed a number of them. Like they changed Highborn to now you get like advantage when talking to people of nobility instead of extra money. But
Yeah.
like instead now they're disregarding nomadic culture overall, and you draw from other cultures at random. And when I like I said, when I say draw, I mean you literally draw at random from a deck of cards. And that's your bonus for the session. Nomadic cultures are not just what they took from other cultures at random and used to their own ends. Was the bag of useful stuff a great representation of the culture? No. But this feels a little insulting.
Oh, the bag makes a lot more sense because if you're a nomadic people, most nomadic cultures have a very heavy emphasis on not wasting things, making use of what you have, and making what you have last longer.
I didn't even know
So the
Wonderborn
bag
was
makes
supposed to be
sense.
like a nomadic community thing before. I thought it was just like you lived alone and moved around a lot, so just were prepared for things.
Well, and you have room in the system to like make that decision, right? But
Yeah.
But if you're going to do community as vaguely representative of culture and how that like has influenced your character, it's kind of fucked up and problematic to imply that well, to say mechanically the nomad people just every session instead borrow, to put it the nice way, features from other community cards.
Yeah,
Because
that's
there's a way of looking at it where you're essentially saying, cool, nomads don't have a culture of their own. They only steal facets from other cultures. And that's fucked up.
I feel like if you want to like stereotypically assign that to any group of people, that's more like colonizers than nomadic people,
Yeah.
which usually aren't the same people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's problematic. And
It's very clear they did not think about this decision at all.
Yeah, like I assume that was on accident, but damn, the optics are bad.
Yeah, the optics aren't great. Like I imagine what it was is like, hey, people are fine, like because they're trying to clean up ambiguity, and having I pull a thing out of a sack is fairly ambiguous in a conversation that the GM and player have to have. So if their goal is to limit table talk, like above the table talk, then that runs into a problem there. What's the immediate solution for the thing that we don't quite have a good idea for yet? Well, they travel all over the place, so they've been to a bunch of different communities, so they could probably just borrow the things from each community. Let's disregard the fact that that kind of doesn't make sense for a number of them. Please see low light vision example.
Yeah, that's like a physical thing to do with your biology. How does... What?
And that's like, I feel like it was a reaction to a thing that wasn't really a problem, but based on their ideology that they're operating off of for the design of the game, it could be seen as a problem. It's like, okay, well, we can fix it, but like, what's our immediate like change to show that we're working and like responding to feedback? Oh, we do this. This is the solution. It's not great. It doesn't look good. It's weird. It's kind of silly. It brings the board game aspect of the game into light, which realistically doesn't need to be looked at too much. We haven't even fucking talked about the fucking vault.
Yeah, we gotta get to that.
Well, it's late, so I'm going to be moving to wrap this, and I apologize for that.
We can make it a
For the
two-parter.
vault, what really just needs to be said is philosophically none of us agree with it. We're all on the same page. The vault's a bad idea. And like it at no point in character progression should it be stunted, and abilities that you earn are not always accessible to you. Taking
that's not how
stress
learning
to
works.
gain taking stress to gain temporary access to an ability and lose access to another, that's fucking insane. Imagine if your wizard had to essentially like take HP damage to sometimes have access to 9th level spells, sometimes have access to 5th, every once in a while have access to 6th level spells, but couldn't have like all of them available at the same time. And they had to spend HP to gain access to those. That's fucking insane, dude.
Or even
Why
if
does
it
the
works
vault
still,
exist?
but it's just like things your rogue knows how to do that they've picked up in their time being a rogue. Like, you
Yeah.
can't really even assign like a whole thing where, like, at least on the wizard side, it's like, oh, maybe it's the way they store spells in their brain or something, like how the lore works in like D&D or whatever. But it's like, no, this is just like stuff a person knows how to do, like tricks they've picked up along
Yeah.
their career or whatever. Like
Yeah.
that's you don't store it away in your like unused brain partition that you're not
Yeah.
like aware of.
Let me
If you can do that, you can definitely hold all that information in your head at once.
Yeah.
First of all,
Let me input what I have, because I have an example that I physically pulled. Because I made a test character, that way I could help with character generation, which is very easy. But
yeah, the character creation is actually pretty nice.
the vault is
At least
silly.
on Demiplane, I don't know what it's like on paper.
Fair. To be fair, you're being handed cards.
That's fair. Yeah.
This is what I'm gonna read it to you verbatim. What I wrote. The vault is silly. You can literally have a card that passively boosts your damage called Body Basher. It's attached to the Vanguard domain, kind of like protector kind of thing, where I add my full force to my attack, aka I add my strength value to all my damage. If I swap that out for an active ability like blocking for an ally, my character is suddenly not strong anymore or not using his full force anymore. That way I can use the shield to block. The abilities are really cool and impactful with no real spell resource system, but holy shit, you just arbitrarily stop you doing things suddenly. Your character just suddenly stops. It's just like, oh, I have to defend my friend's life, so I'm not going to use my full strength. Nani?
Yeah. You know what it reads like to me is that it comes off as a very gamified way to limit how many abilities a player has access to, not for balance purposes, but to not overwhelm players with options. Even though the options are still there and you can just gain stress to get them, but they only have access to 5 things at a time so that they don't get overwhelmed. And to me, that reads as fucking insulting.
Yeah. Also, it makes it more complicated to access all of them instead of easier. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way for it to logically make sense in fiction. It's a very gamey mechanic that realistically has no place in a tabletop RPG. If this was a board game, it would be one discussion, but this isn't a fucking board game. It's not a trading card game. Hand size is not a thing in a tabletop role-playing game. I don't know why we have it in this RPG inherently tied to progression. The whole point of progression is your character gets stronger, and you hit a soft cap halfway through the progression. This shit happens at level 5. You hit
4.
the soft cap of how many abilities you have access. Well, no, it's
because you start with 2.
4. My bad. Yeah. Well, I think it's level 5 that you actually have to choose for something to go in the vault.
True.
Why I say
I guess that's
that would be
fair.
the 6th card you would have.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
So, like, why isn't there a fucking soft cap in a tabletop role playing game? Like, if you don't want people to have more than 5 abilities, just have the level cap be 5. Fuck's sake. Why is there 10 levels?
Yeah. And there's only one domain that interacts with the vault in a special way, and that's the codex domain. And it's just like, oh, do you have this card in your hand? I'm gonna call it hand for lack of a better term. In your hand, cool. You get to add a passive to your abilities, like a passive number increase to your abilities. And also, you can at any point go, fuck this card. I pull a card out of the vault.
I think there's something sorcerers can do where you put a card in a vault. Let me see if I can find it again real quick. Oh yeah, it's channel raw power. Yeah, once per long rest, you can place a domain card from your it's called loadout. I forgot it was named. Loadout into your vault. You can choose to either gain hope equal to the level of the card, or enhance a damage dealing spell by dealing extra magic damage equal to twice the level of the card. Which it's I don't dislike channel raw power as a mechanic by itself. Like spending a resource to gain another resource or to increase your damage is a very sorcerer thing to do. But I don't think it's ever worth it to put a card into the vault without taking one out.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, just forget how to do this until you take it out again to What?
Oh yeah, or you're just spent, despite the fact that you can still cast more magic.
Yeah. Also, like that. Not only does that cost a resource, one of the biggest resources in the game of like having an ability, it's also once per day.
But like I said, moving to wrap this up.
Yeah.
I would like to ask everyone to contribute one thing, only one thing, they would do to try to improve this game.
Okay.
So
I might have to go last. I need a minute to think about that.
that's fair.
I mean, I already did that with the action round thing. So,
Yeah. Here's
although I do have something else that I can add,
absolutely.
and it comes with something I like. So I'll go next.
I'll go first.
I did have something actually.
Oh, you have something?
A very simple addition actually. There's more things that I'm thinking about, but this is something that I'm kind of shocked that they didn't have in the system to start with. Where is the farmer background?
What about that? Yeah, there just wasn't a rural one at all,
I think-
which is like a hero's journey staple.
Yeah.
The,
What are the most common professions in that time period that like a fantasy game of this
there's
type takes?
like community in the mountains and like the nomads and
Yeah.
but there's no like rural.
There's no farm boy. I think both you and Zemian went and like looked for it, couldn't find it, and was like, "The fuck is it? Why isn't this a thing?"
There's not a lot of social mobility once you become a farmer in this setting.
Oh God.
Just,
That's who you are forever.
I'm gonna put the easy one. When I say easy, it's the easy suggestion, hard to execute one, but it's the one that I know that I think the majority of us are thinking about. Move away from the rules light system foundation for this game. You have a wall, a roof, a door, and a window that is just opulent. These great ideas, but you put them on one of the foundations that doesn't want you to add things, or at least makes it difficult and almost deconstructive to add to it. You have, it's like, oh, you have an attribute, you add your attribute to the roll, you're done. Cool, that's nice and simple. I get it. Math is scary. Math does not need to be scary. Don't be afraid of math. It can't actually hurt you. The idea of like, oh, if we add too much math, it gets crunchy. It's like you don't have to add a lot. You just have to make it to where you aren't afraid to add two different numbers to a dice roll.
In a world where everybody has a smartphone and we're sitting here being afraid of adding, what was it, a D6?
A
And
d6.
instead now it's just roll an extra die and choose the highest, but also you still have to add your bonuses.
Yeah.
So like, man, but adding a value between 1 and 6 was too much math. If it's really that hard, all of you have a smartphone. Pull up the fucking calculator if it's really that hard for you. I don't care if you have to count on your fingers. It's not hard. It's basic addition. I'm not asking you to find the square root of pi. I'm not asking you to divide by 0. I'm not asking for calculus. It's literally 6 plus 12. Come on. It's not hard.
The time that math is like done on the sheet, so you don't really have to do it while you're playing. Like
Yeah.
in D&D, in Pathfinder, and similar systems, this is done very commonly. Like your bonus to a skill, like total, is written on the sheet, so
Like, it's
you don't have to interrupt play it by doing math if you're like really bad at math or something and don't like it.
yeah, and you also, it's like you don't have to multiply either. You don't have to multiply, divide. Sometimes you do have to subtract. That's fine. It just, because that was one of the takes. Like they said, hey, remove the d6. That way you don't have to add that or subtract it for advantage and disadvantage anymore. I remember going, "That's odd. I liked doing that." And then I remember also seeing in that same chat people going, "Thank God." And I'm like, y'all joking, right? But like, I'm not saying
I mean-
all. I'm not going to say all rules light systems are bad. I'm not gonna say that.
Yeah, I've played some that were pretty good.
Yeah, like I like Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark, I think, executes rules light fairly well. But I feel like it's one of those things where the root of the problem isn't that the system is too difficult to understand.
Yeah.
But that's my go on that. Is just move away from rules light. Syndra?
I'm gonna actually start with something I really like. And this is very small, or this suggestion is gonna be very small, but I really enjoy how the weapons are done in this.
Yes.
For the most part. Like generally, I mean, I prefer crunchier systems that would just have more stats on a weapon, but I really like the idea that the weapons are all kind of, well, for one, there are weapons that just scale on any stat. So if you're a caster, you don't just like suck at fighting for a while. Like you have a weapon that just does weapon things. Using your magic stat because it's just like made for a caster. And the options are really good. I think like hand runes as a weapon option is neat. I like being just like, yeah, my weapon is just like these tattoos on my hands I use as a magic focus. At least that's how I flavored them. Um, and there's a lot of room for whatever kind of flavor you want in the weapons and like in with how they function and such. But I think I would like at least just a little bit of description on each of them. There there are a few cases where I just don't know what they're talking about because the only description on it is just the name. Like my sorcerer has a dual staff because that's the it's one of the range weapons that uses instinct. I don't really know what a dual staff is, and I don't know how it's different from a different staff that like a wizard would use. I don't remember what the other one was called. I would need to go to.
I think it was just called quarterstaff at that point.
The quarterstaff is melee, and the great staff is the other ranged staff.
Oh yeah, great staff is what I was thinking of. Like I don't know how a dual staff is different from great staff. It might just be smaller, but
Damage and range.
no. Like if I'm looking at one in real life, I don't know what makes it different. Like what makes the physical object different from
Yeah.
the other? I I don't know what I'm supposed to be imagining with that. Like a dual staff implies there are.
Go on.
Yeah, like I assume a great staff is big, and other staffs are not notable for their size, I suppose. I feel like the dual staff might imply that there are like two of something, whether it has two ends or it forks or something like that. I don't really know. I could be completely off base. There's no way for me to know because I don't know what they're going for. I like the role play and fluff space for weapons being whatever I want them to be, but having just a little bit more to go to build that on would be good.
Yeah, like just saying typically looks like
Yeah.
would be plenty.
There was a comment I remembered. We talked about the weapons yesterday on a non-recorded, not yesterday, the last time.
Yeah.
When we weren't recording, which kind of breaks this just one suggestion rule. But was like basically, why aren't there like two ways to use a weapon, two stats you can use it with?
Yeah, two stats to use a type of weapon. I do remember that conversation.
Yeah.
I think it was recorded.
I can see that.
Yeah, the current lineup is limited. Either give more options on what's available or add more options. Or both, honestly.
Yeah.
More is good.
Yes.
That brings us to Zemian.
Oh god. Okay. Fucking they're what I would like to say is try again. But that's not fair. I I think the most glaring thing right now is to address the combat. It's the glaring flaw to me right now. There was like the first thing that I was really railing against was getting in there and seeing like, oh, we don't actually have initiative. Um, a lot of that needs to be addressed. And it needs to not be these half measure optional rules or just not talking about it. Because even the optional rule suggestions they made, I was like, no, that's not a solution. That's still allowing the problem to exist, but with a limit. So combat, particularly in initiative, needs to be dealt with when you have this system that is like 80% combat rules. Major glaring issue. Not that if it was fixed, I'd suddenly start playing the system or running it, but it would make it more tolerable for me.
Yeah, and to everyone listening, understand, and even if you are part of the Darrington Press team that's working on it, and for some reason you found our stream, hello, how are you? We thank you for making it all the way to the end, despite the fact that we have spent a portion of this time kind of ragging on the game. But like we this comes from a place of love. Of like we want the overall space to be improved. We want more good games out there. We want more options other than D&D.
Oh yeah, and like me personally, when I heard about Daggerheart being in production, I was like kind of thrilled. I was like, oh, this could be really cool,
Yeah.
especially knowing like who was involved. And then,
Yeah.
well, Candela Obscura came out, and that made me kind of like my impressions of that made me a little nervous for what Daggerheart might look like. And then we started to see the card stuff, and then the book came out, and it's like, well, let's play test it. Let's give it a fair shot. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the ideas are very cool. So I think if some of that core system stuff that we've talked about were tightened up, it could be very fun.
Yeah, and like again, this is a playtest, so it could be changed. But for everyone listening, this is not coming from a place of malice or disdain. All of us, well, I don't know about Bisc. I have not asked, but I know the majority of us here are fans of like the people at Critical Role, what in a number of things that they have done and are doing. But we want to try to help in our own way make a game that we would like to play. And we see this, we play it. It's not a game that we'd want to play, and we can't like if we're not going to play it, we're not going to support it. We're not going to. With this podcast, we're not going to be putting any more episodes out. I'm sorry if that disappoints a number of people, unless some serious things change to where we'd want to go back to it.
And
And
that's not us saying like boycott or anything. It just means
no,
we wouldn't be interested.
it's not to our
Yeah,
taste.
no.
We have limited amount of time, and there are games that we would rather play.
Oh my god, there's so much shit. I wish I had more time on the weekends and people had more availability on the weekends so I could run more stuff. There's a lot of stuff I would even just short adventures I would love to run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's our review in a nutshell. Again, playtest, beta, things could change. We thank you all for listening, and if you want to hear more like this, let us know. I have the interaction feature on for Spotify. I don't know if that works on anything else though.
I think Fisk had something.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this is like their first game that they're designing. It's
Darrington
just my
Press? No, this is not the first game they're designing.
Oh.
Darrington Press has done a few board games. They also did Candela Obscura. We'll probably never have a review for that, I don't think.
They've done splats for 5e. Well, not splats, but
yeah, they put out stuff.
Yeah.
Is that the name
yeah.
under which they've done the Wild Mount setting stuff? or did they like branch off on anything to do Candela Obscura? And
I think, technically speaking, Wildmount was before Darrington. After Wildmount, they did Darrington and then did like the Exandria or
Yeah.
Taldore, like the big purple book with the dragon on it.
A lot of the people were
that's what I
involved.
meant. I forgot what was the name of the
Yeah.
overarching scheme.
Okay.
I thought it was
There
Wildmount.
were designers that formed Darrington Press, as well as like some of the other larger names that you would know, that were involved with the Wizard products. And I think Darrington was involved in the newer stuff that is technically Wizard products. But they did not wholly put those out on their own.
Oh, okay.
But we thank you all for listening and hope to have you on the next one. Bye.
Scringus Mingus.
Bye.
Bye.
Later.